Chapter 14. Section 2.32.10. If a mage is unable to serve due to sickness or other physical ailments that will not pass with time, an alternative may be agreed upon. 4 years are owed, but they may be exchanged for help with experiments, testing, or even non-invasive medical experiments. All avenues should be explored prior to declaring a willful refusal to serve. All mages can do some sort of service. The question didn't leave me as I headed into my room, having watched as Bridget disappeared into hers. I made another cup of coffee. I needed to cleanse my mouth and mind. Once the smell of decent beans and some cinnamon had worked their way into my psyche, I pulled up my computer and connected to the Wi-Fi. Messages were waiting from Joe, Sable, and Charles. I didn't bother to fight the smile that appeared, and I relaxed a bit more. Sable and Joe were both online. I sent them morning greetings along with the information about Lisbeth's death. I couldn't call it murder. No matter how much it felt like a setup, no one had forced her to take the drugs, and trying to prove that Camp had laced them with something would be impossible. The whole situation was looking worse and worse. But running away wouldn't solve anything. It needed to be changed or stopped. But right now, I didn't know how to do it. I hate politics. I pulled up Charles' messages, interested in what he had found.
Corey, Bridget O'Keefe, age 21, emerged about 8 months ago. Her mother has been fighting with the draft board about her serving in the draft since then, and is on social media trying to get her daughter back. High-functioning Down syndrome, has a regular job, and graduated high school. Her mother, Margaret, has tried to get exceptions for her, but none of them were acknowledged.
The information sat there waiting for me. I read it a couple times, processing the ramifications. Bridget's mother had managed to delay her entering the draft for 8 months when her daughter couldn't or wouldn't go to college. It implied a lot about Margaret's stubbornness or political power. Is her mom someone important? I paused, then typed again. And thanks for this. You aren't putting yourself at risk, are you?
Not an issue. And not really. Most of this is on social media. Important depends on how you look at it. She is the protocol officer for the Secretary of State's office. Something about public affairs, but she doesn't seem to have any real connections to anyone on the draft board. Mostly, she is relentless and uses the laws to her advantage. Mostly Section 2.32.10.
I sat back, thinking. This meant that Bridget had a home and a mother, or family, that loved her. But how did I get her out of this? How did I get myself out of this? The rest of them, were they worth it? Dragons did what they thought was right. The problem is, I didn't know what I thought was right. Any word on the others? I finally typed. The coffee helped ward off the coldness I felt as I waited.
Claudia is an idiot. Dwayne is a rapist and a spoiled schoolboy. Yvette, she said she was an escort, right?
His responses were almost instant. The man could type like he had as many arms as Ericina did. Yes.
If so, she was a high-paid one and sailed through her degree with ease. She's a wizard with a BS in biology. Also, she started her draft a year ago, so there is no reason for her to be there.
That actually explained a lot. She went too hot and cold. Undercover work was not going to be her forte. Charles was still typing.
Neil is a dropout and failure across the board.
There, I had to interrupt. Not exactly. I suspect he's hugely dyslexic, worse than Joe, and the system failed him. They've washed him out into the military. They'll remove his hair and nails and teach him to never use magic.
Huh. That wouldn't stop any of us.
There was a warm, fuzzy feeling in him thinking of our small group as us. True, but he's never learned how, so it will. Elizabeth is dead. They killed her today. I explained that in short, tight words, and that I thought it was a setup.
How do you end up in these situations, Corey?
I don't know. Though I suspect there is a cosmic-level Murphy's cloak on me courtesy of magic. A laughing face appeared.
That would be about the only thing that makes any sense. Feng and Ben are the interesting ones. The felonies Ben is charged with, all are FTC crimes. He figured out how to manipulate the stock market and made a few million. But they caught him. He forfeited the money and has the double draft service. But what is interesting is I think he's still doing it, and this time it's legal. The young man will make it out of the draft and walk back to billions. He's a pattern genius, and I'm pretty sure he's written software to read market fluctuations.
That surprised me. So, white-collar crime? Not anything where anyone was hurt?
I'm sure a few hedge funds are cursing his name, but yeah, nothing violent or even dangerous.
It was only illegal due to a technicality, wasn't it? That just popped into my head, but it was the only thing that made sense.
Exactly. One he probably didn't know about because 18 months ago, it wasn't illegal.
It all fit together nicely. A way to control people. And so far, most of their criminals were just misguided or desperate. So far, the only ones I really thought were true criminals were Ricardo and Dwayne, and maybe Jake. I still didn't know if he was a creep or a burgeoning serial killer. What about Feng? Rather than the rapid typing, there was a pause.
This is one I wish we could talk about. VPN is up, right?
I double-checked just to be sure. Yes.
Feng is an archmage and has a double master's in psychology and biophysics. He's also 3 years into his draft, and he's damn near a ghost. No social media, no life, just working under the draft. I haven't figured out what department he works for. Do you need me to find out?
Nah, I figure can't put him here. I just don't get Feng's game. I'm not sure he has said more than 4 words to me.
Well, watch him. Anything else you need?
Besides to not be dealing with all of this, when I get my placement, dinner? The 6 of us?
That would be nice. Erichina says she misses the queens. What is it with that name?
If you figure it out, let me know. I typed, shaking my head. Carelian refuses to answer me. He just says, I am. So who knows? In my mind, I could see him laughing.
Kath.
Exactly. Okay, I've got a paper to write, and this is only day 3. Thanks again.
Anytime.
His icon winked out. I pulled up the writing program, and the door to the room opened. I spun, ready for an attack. Lady Luck around me, and a shield ready to snap up. But it was Carelian. His ears laid back against his skull. He slipped in and shut the door, locking it. I relaxed. Locking the door needed to become something I did every time. Another thing to remember. We need to talk. He sent it with a sharp force that surprised me. I'd never heard him this insistent. I started to respond out loud, but his lashing tail and twitching ears told me something had really upset him. Always. What's wrong? I made myself sit back and pay attention to him. He started to pace in the room, but gave up as it took 3 of his strides before he reached the wall and had to turn. He threw himself down on the floor and aggressively groomed his front paws, all claws fully extended. Rather than prompting him, he had his own sense of timing. I waited until his tail calmed down. I followed the one you call Feng. He smells of deceit and corruption. I nodded, watching him, trying to figure out what had him so agitated. He called someone, speaking in Mandarin or maybe Cantonese. He managed to mutter in my mind, which felt odd. Wait, he had a phone? I said, sitting up, surprised. Carelian shot back both ears, opening and closing his claws in annoyance. Okay, sorry. And you speak Cantonese? I just looked at him confused. Realm creatures understand all languages. Does it matter right now? His tail lashing increased, and I raised my hands. Nope, got it. He had been able to speak Japanese, so why was I surprised he could speak another language? Or maybe it was more he sensed the intent of the words? Either way, I wasn't going to push it right now. He spoke about you, mentioned your skills were higher than expected, and you were not the flighty woman they had been told to expect. They would need to step up the efforts to get you to misstep. I shrugged. That isn't a surprise. Charles told me he is already halfway through his draft, so he's a plant here to try and make me mess up. Carelian paused.
Charles would see true. It matters not. What is of dire importance is the next part. The person he spoke to. Yes, I could hear both sides of the conversation. I have ears on my head, not useless bits of flesh like most humans. Asked if the rates were declining. Feng responded that there were fewer mages regarded as threats in the last year, and they had managed to increase the rates of accidents during the draft.
I frowned, trying to process what this meant. Someone is trying to kill mages in the draft? I thought the draft did that well enough.
What is truly disturbing is the second part of that conversation.
His tail was lashing again, and I tossed him the pillow to attack. He'd shred it, but they could add a pillow to my bill if they cared. His claws sank in, and a few rakes with his hind claws and the pillow shredded. I'd need another one, but I could live for tonight.
Blood and soft flesh would make me feel better.
I waited, wondering what he was going to say.
They spoke about the rewards for eliminating any mage before they sired or birthed children. Bonuses for female mages.
They what? The words burst out of me at almost a yell as I looked at him. I felt the familiar prickles of Murphy and dismissed it with a frustrated thought. They are purposefully killing mages and getting bonuses? But Feng is a mage. Carelian's tail flicked, sending bits of fluff floating through the room.
Yes, but from something that was said, I don't think he's from our country. I think he is from China. They are actively trying to reduce the number of mages your people have available.
He paused, eyes still slitted.
He mentioned a woman, one he called Jade Laughing. She would expect results soon. There was a meaning there, how he said it, but I don't know what it meant. Ruler, boss, manager, some sort of meaning like that.
My stomach churned. I set my coffee aside, wishing instead for some milk. Did they know you heard them? Carelian? Did they see you?
Do you think I am a kid to be so easy to spot?
He hissed inside my mind, and I shuddered. It tickled in a horrible way.
No. I stayed until he finished the conversation. It wasn't very long, but he did ask what the bonus was if he managed to get you to cross the line and be executed, because he thought he had enough of you figured out to provoke.
I sat there, my body shaking with either rage or fear. I didn't know which. And how much was that?
2 million.
I whirled to the computer, pulling up the chat again. Charles, you there? I typed quickly after triple-checking again my encrypted VPN was up.
Should I start charging you?
I couldn't even find it in me to be snarky back. Do you have access to the stats for mages and how many have died over the last few years? And then tell me how many of them had children before they died.
Corey, what's going on?
I typed so fast I had to go back and correct my words to make them legible, as I explained what Carelian had overheard. Do you have stats on deaths while in service, broken down by age and gender?
Have? Not at my fingertips. 1 minute.
I resisted the desire to fidget, though I was already ready to go to the gym just to burn off energy and stress.
Here, this is stuff that is publicly available, though not obvious. What are you looking for?
His letters appeared rapid-fire as he typed, and I garnered my thoughts. What is the percent of women entering the draft that finish it alive?
46%.
I blinked. Are you telling me 54% of all women that enter die?
That is what the numbers say, not me.
Men? I typed out.
67%.
Causes?
As a whole, 21% suicide, 46% accident, 10% illness, 23% Ronin.
I stared at the numbers and felt sick. They are killing mages. How much have these jumped in the last 3 years? This time he was gone for 15 minutes. I distracted myself and Carelian by brushing him. A ping from my computer pulled me away, but both of us were much more relaxed by that point.
Remember, there are no stats yet for this year or last year, but in a 3-year span, the death rate has increased by 321%.
No matter how long I looked, the numbers didn't change. Someone or some countries were purposefully working to get mages killed during their draft. Chapter 15. Section 1.135.62. All mages are entitled to an education. Disabilities such as speech, hearing, language, or learning shall not be used as an excuse to deny an education. All efforts shall be made to provide material and support in pursuit of this education foundation. Unless the mage chooses of their own free will to not learn, they cannot be penalized. Charles and I debated until dinner time, and he brought Joe and Sable into the discussion. They were both horrified and promised to double down on making sure they didn't have issues over the next year or so. Sable only had a year left. Joe had 3. Either way, they needed to be very careful. While Sable was in a stable job, Joe worked outside and accidents could happen. We didn't come to any conclusions or answers. In fact, mostly the only thing I became was angry. Who the hell decided they got to kill people and push mages to cross the line so they had an excuse to kill them? It made perfect sense, though. The draft was the perfect time to get someone to break the rules, because you were always watched. Always. I came to no conclusions and collected Bridget for dinner. She was more agitated than usual and kept asking where her mother was. Stress and worry wrapped around me, but she just talked about banana pudding and vanilla wafers, and I smiled and tried not to cry. I created some bullshit paper, and the 4 of us talked late into the night via chat as we tried to think of what to do about anything.
I don't know, Corey, but all I can say is Erichina says the Herald will figure it out. I must admit, I don't understand her faith in you, but if anyone can, it's you.
Charles and the others signed off after that, and I crawled into bed, worried. Carelian slept with me, and I wrapped around him, letting his purr and warmth soothe my soul. I was waiting outside when York showed up. He nodded at me and went and banged on doors, getting everyone up. Bridget came over to me, aiming more for Carelian than me. We went through the morning exercises, which at least warmed me up. Then we started our jog. Carelian disappeared before the first turn. Running long distances was not anything he preferred to do. He commented often that he wasn't a unicorn. Bridget actually ran pretty well, and I gave her mom silent props for the beautiful daughter she had raised. We were at the halfway point, the road and main gate to our right, when she stopped. "I'm going home now." She turned and started walking toward the gate. "Bridget, come on. We have to finish the run." I jogged over to her. "Everyone else is going this way." "No. Done. Going home." She kept up a steady pace toward the gate. "Want to see Mom." Bridget, your wallet and ID stuff are in your room, right? You can't go without that." I offered, desperate to get her to stop. She paused, then shook her head, red hair flying around in an ungainly mess. "No, we'll get later. Going home now." She kept walking in a steady manner that seemed somehow unstoppable. "Bridget, you can't leave," I said, trying to keep up with her. "Yes, going home," she insisted. York must have noticed we were gone, because his shout boomed from behind us.
"Where do you think you're going? The route is this way. Just because you can do magic doesn't mean you get to wander off when you feel like it. Get your butts back with the others."
I could hear footsteps as Bridget kept walking, her mouth set in a firm line as I walked backwards in front of her. "He sounds angry. We should get back with the others." Every word was a lie. Right at that moment, I really wanted to just burn down the world, but I couldn't let this young woman get killed. There had to be something.
"Bridget O'Keefe, halt!"
he yelled, having easily caught up to us. "No, I'm going home. I want my mom!
Her fists were clenched, and she didn't stop walking.
Bridget O'Keefe, if you don't stop now, you will be in violation of the draft orders provided by Brian Camp.
York barked out.
Merlin's jizz, that can get her executed.
My mind raced faster than ever, but I didn't make any traction. There wasn't anything I could do besides die with her.
He's not my mom. I want to go home.
She stopped and turned to him.
My mom tells me what to do. No one else. I'm going home.
Her lips trembled. York leaned close, his nose inches from hers.
You will start running along that route, and you will go to class. Is that understood?
Her eyes widened, and tears slipped down her face.
No!
Bridget screamed, and I flinched back as a solid inch of hair vaporized from her ends. A wave of fear, anger, and confusion slammed into me like I'd been hit by a wall of water. I had to swallow a scream.
Corey!
Carelian sounded panicked, and I whirled looking for him. He cowered on one side of the road while I saw York bellowing in rage.
That is an attack! Stop!
Boomed out York. Magic spun out from her, her hair visibly shorter as I felt Murphy's cloak surrounding us. Things started to form out of thin air, shapes and figures, and I stared at them. She's calling ghosts. The knowledge horrified me. All I wanted to do was cry or scream or run away. She's projecting her emotions, I told Carelian and myself. I swallowed hard, the sharp taste of bile-tainted coffee rising up my throat as I grappled to not react.
Bridget, stop it! You're scaring people! Home! No!
She was sobbing, but absolutely unmoved. I looked around for York and saw him over off the sidewalk on the phone. The other mages were all huddled together under a large oak, looking at us with a mixture of horror and anticipation. I had no doubt he was calling for backup, and I couldn't think of anything to stop her. I could KO her and try to convince Camp.
Bridget, I'm sorry.
I moved toward her, my necklace thumping on my neck as I tried to get to her.
No!
She screamed and started stomping her feet and waving her arms. I felt something grab my very being and pull. I could hear others screaming and knew she was pulling at all their souls. I panicked and did a wide KO, hard. It bounced off something, which I hadn't known was possible, but Bridget shuddered and the pull stopped. My knees almost buckled, threatening to send me tumbling, but I staggered and stayed upright. Bridget swayed and looked around.
Freeze! Get on the ground!
The words came from behind me. I glanced over my shoulder to see that Hefty and Stocky had appeared, guns drawn and pointed at both of us. Camp stood between them.
Bridget O'Keefe, get on the ground now! You are under arrest for violation of Section 2.20.32. If you come with us quietly, it doesn't need to get unpleasant,
Camp said, his voice carrying from where he stood. The other draftees behind him, and Bridget behind me.
No, I want to go home.
She was bawling in earnest now, taking big gulping breaths of air as tears ran down her face.
I want my mom.
The muggy morning seemed to cry with her, as I felt water running down the nape of my neck.
Camp,
I shouted.
She doesn't understand.
He looked at me, anger written large on his face.
It doesn't matter. She almost killed everyone here. Do you think I don't recognize a server?
I flinched. Server was what I'd used on that gunman a few years ago, when Japan was still trying to kill me. Only spirit mages were taught it, but it ripped your life from your body. Philosophers were still arguing what that implied, but for the rest of us, it meant you were dead.
There has to be something.
I was begging as I swiveled between the crying girl and the furious Camp.
There isn't.
He looked at the two goons.
Take her. If she does anything, you know what to do.
The men, pale, grim looks on their faces,
nodded and moved forward, guns at the ready. Yorkin moved over to where the mages stood, both a guard and a witness to what was about to go down. "No!" I shouted, feeling my own tears pressing behind my eyes. The pale faces of the other mages remained in my vision, like after images. Desperate, I ran my fingers over the spirit symbol on my necklace, my birthday present from Joe after I merged. The first year at GA Magtech, the birthday party in Bainjarl's realm. My fingers stroked the scale secured behind the symbol. Tersane's scale. Her words rang in my head as if she was repeating them right now.
It is a token. If you ever need me, break it. I will know. Use wisely.
But what could she do? She wouldn't change the laws here. That much had been made clear. A random comment Hamadia had made that day in the glade, when Joe and Sable had been freed from the trap she'd put them in, whispered through my mind. Before I'd finished processing the thought, I ripped off the necklace and snapped it in half. "Tersane, I need that favor!" I yelled the words, fear making my voice high and sharp. I glanced at my right wrist, and the circle of magic symbols were in full color, radiant almost. They pulsed with the beat of my heart. Carelian looked at me, his ears already laid back against his skull.
Magic's breath.
He cursed and raced to Bridget. Camp, who had been following his two goons at a slow pace as they approached Bridget, turned to look at me, face draining of blood and emotion.
"What did you do?"
His voice low, with some emotion I couldn't define. A slash of pain spiked through my head, and I gazed at the pieces of scale in my hand. Doubts assailed me, and I looked up at him, all my bravado gone. "I'm not sure." The rip formed about 10 feet between where I stood and Bridget. The two goons had pulled back and now flanked Camp. Their faces were all ghost white. I don't know what I looked like, but I'd started this. I'd better see it through. Wishing I wore something besides shorts, a sports bra, and a now sweaty tank top.
Are you sure, my queen?
Carelian's voice was oddly hesitant. Doesn't matter. It's done. I didn't take my eyes off the rip, even as I waited for a bullet to the skull by Camp or his thugs. The rip stopped growing, now taller than the oaks that dotted the campus. 1 second, it was a distortion in the air, one you couldn't see through. The next, Tersane slithered out. I hadn't seen her since my private graduation party. The Guzmans had thrown me a small party, and Bainjarl, Esmir, Tersane, and Jorgaz had shown up, which, after their wedding appearance, didn't really surprise me. At the party, she'd barely been 6 feet tall and spent most of the time laughing with her snakes looking just as amused. Salastra had also been invited, much like you invited the scary fairy, but didn't attend, to my personal relief. Right now, Tersane displayed what I called her regal mane. Her face beautiful but impassive, her height at least 12 feet tall, and her snakes alive and hissing. Her scales glittered in the morning sun, and water started to condense on her skin. Her impassively beautiful face turned to me, and my mouth went empty creek bed parched.
Merlin Monroe, you have called in your favor.
Her voice was so pure and exact that my eardrums felt lacerated. I bowed in a short yet sincere motion. Tersane, thank you for coming.
You called. I had promised. I do not break my word.
There was a world of warning in her words, and the possibility I had made a huge mistake rattled my soul. Chapter 16. Section 3. Wandering Mage Act. In as so much that the lack of what would be offered by the mage does not affect either their health, appearance, or reputation, the request of any official from either the federal, state, county, or city government for assistance to prevent either the serious injury or death of any person or persons, whether known or unknown to the mage, must be granted. The mage must provide said assistance until the offering boundary is crossed. At such time, the mage may demur with the words, "The cost is detrimental." I took a deep breath and tried to control my shivers. Either I trusted Tersane or I didn't. Either way, I'd started this domino chain of events. "See this young woman?" I fought to call her a woman when I saw a child that I desperately wanted to protect. "She has a birth defect we call Down syndrome. It makes her simple." How in the world did I explain the myriad of ramifications that went with Down syndrome? In the end, I fell back on the words Carelian had used. "Ah," she murmured, and slid over to Bridget, who stood there, eyes wide, tear tracks on her cheeks, as she looked up at the demigoddess. Carelian stood next to her purring, and I saw Tersane linger on him before shifting her gaze to Bridget. "What is your name, child?" I found my ability to breathe locked in my chest as I watched. Maybe this is what seeing things in slow motion was like. Terror and hope in one dreadful compilation. Bridget looked up at her, sniffing snot back up. "Bridget O'Keefe." She looked at Tersane closely. "Are you a snake? I didn't think snakes were as pretty as you are." Tersane laughed, the clear tones shattering the hold on everything, and I swear even the leaves started to rustle again. "I am a Gorgon, child, and thank you. Why are you crying?" Tersane didn't get smaller, but she did seem to crouch, lowering herself to not loom over Bridget as much. "They won't let me go home," she said, a tremble appearing in her voice. "I want to go home." Tersane turned her gaze to me, and only the fact that I had met her multiple times before, some when she was being much more terrifying, prevented me from either fleeing or crumpling to the ground. "Is that true?" "It is draft orientation. All mages are required to serve. She isn't allowed to leave per the terms of the law because she is a mage," I said, managing to keep my voice level. Her gaze slid from me, and I sagged a bit. I took evil pleasure in the whimpers from behind me.
"I'm out of here. I ain't getting paid enough to put up with monsters."
My rage spiked at anyone using that word on Tersane. I turned and saw Hefty booking it across the campus, leaving Camp and Stocky standing there. Camp had a wet patch on the front of his pants. I'd watch my language. Tersane is not a monster. I growled out the words. Scary as all get out, yes. But then I'd seen Indira in a full rage, and she could be terrifying also. Camp shot a terrified look at me, but I didn't give him anything. I just pretended it was an afternoon with Tersane at the house, serving tea and cookies. Her favorites were spice cookies. "And you are the representative of the draft?" she asked in her silken tones that reminded me of a knife slipping through silk. Camp's head jerked up and down as his mouth worked, but no words came out. "And is what the child says true? You will not let her leave?" He swallowed 3 times in rapid succession before trying to speak.
"Laws say taking her is required. She can't control her magic. Attacked others. She broke the law."
His confidence got a bit greater as he got those words out and stood up a bit straighter.
"She has broken our laws by attacking us. Her life is forfeit."
Ah. Tersane settled down and looked at me, her face showing nothing but serene perfection. "Harold, you know I cannot interfere your laws, at least, not without grave consequences. So what favor did you want? While I could whisk her away, I do not believe she would find life in the realms congenial." I shuddered at the idea. Bridget there in the realms? By herself? No, that would not be a good idea. No, Tersane, I would never ask you to break the laws of Earth. At least not blatantly ask. Subtly hint? Oh, yes. And Bridget is not suited for living in the realms. I wasn't suited for it. Most humans weren't.
Then what are you requesting I do?
A hint of curiosity in that arched brow, with her snakes waving around her head. Bile bubbled in my throat, and I steeled myself for my insane request. I took one glance at Bridget, and hoped she didn't hate me for all eternity for this. But the idea of them killing her, killing others like her, couldn't be continued. The image of Kelly, the murderer who had been autistic. The court had confirmed her diagnosis after she was executed. The stats from class flickered through my mind. Deaths that were real now. Lives destroyed. If this could be stopped, these people saved, I had to try. Which meant I was going to play God. Hamadia mentioned once that you could drain magic from someone. I said, my voice clear in the oppressive humidity of the morning. She went still. Even her snake froze. Heart pounding, I stood there as she slowly turned to look at me.
Yes, that is one of my abilities.
Her voice laden with hidden weight. I heard nothing from the mages around me. Even Carelian had gone quiet, as if they all held their breaths. Then I formally ask, both as the favor you once granted me and the herald of magic. I paused. I was taking a leap of faith here, and I might be the one who paid the price. But I couldn't not try. That you drain all magic from Bridget and others like her, so none of them will be subject to laws they are not capable of obeying.
Hey, wait, what?
Camp started out protesting and made 2 steps toward us. I could see him out of the corner of my eye. Tersane glanced at him and snarled. That perfect face turned into something from the deepest recesses of our minds, and I saw Camp turn white as a pale sheet of stone seemed to coat him. If I hadn't been so sure Tersane didn't mean me harm, I would have screamed like the other mages. I could hear shrieking that I pegged Claudia for, and rapid footsteps that I just knew were Jake and Dwayne, but I didn't take my eyes off Tersane.
I wish to ensure I understand the herald's request.
Her face back to beauty as she leaned in close. The snakes all arrowed in on me, stopping about 2 feet from my face. The herald is not only granting permission, but making the request of Tersane to remove magic from any human not capable of meeting human laws. There was a wealth of minefields in that, but no matter what, I didn't want to see people dying because the laws didn't take into consideration their own shortcomings. Anyone not mentally or developmentally capable of using magic according to our laws. Yes. Nerves had my digestive system in knots, and I had to convince myself that throwing up would be very unhelpful. A slow, almost malicious smile spread across her face, and my doubts quadrupled. What had I done?
So be it.
She turned and went back to Bridget, who had sat down, her head on Carelian, sniffing.
Do not hurt her. She is a sweet girl.
His voice echoed in my mind, and I knew he spoke to Tersane.
I would not. There is no purpose served in hurting one such as she, though Esmir would not understand you protecting her.
Tersane countered as she crouched down, her snake body lowering her so her waist almost touched the ground.
True, but I am not my Malkin. True.
Tersane looked at Bridget.
I am going to touch you. Then I promise they will let you go home.
Home? Bridget lifted her head, voice trembling. I can go home?
Yes.
Tersane's voice was gentle. Her hand reached out and cupped Bridget's face. In this size, Tersane's hand covered most of the back of Bridget's head and the entire right side of her face. The the tattoo hidden behind her palm.
This might feel odd.
Then something happened. I couldn't explain it or even be sure of what I sensed. That feeling before lightning strikes, the intake of breath before you scream, that pull when a roller coaster drops you. It was all of those and none at the same time. Magic moved, swirling through the campus, more tangible than I ever felt, though that seemed like a lie. It built and swarmed and throbbed and hung over her, a storm cloud waiting to pour. I looked around, part of me expecting to see army troops rushing in or portals to all the realms appearing, but it was the quiet I'd seen on TV before a tornado struck. That analogy didn't make me feel any better. My attention was pulled back to Tursane by her snakes hissing. Then all magic broke loose. The heavy, weighting sensation snapped, and I heard everyone behind me yelling and various calls to get out of there. I didn't bother to turn and see what was going on. All my attention was riveted on Tursane, Bridget, and Carelian. The dam holding the magic in the air ruptured, and it streamed into Tursane. I couldn't really see it. It was more like a heat mirage or a crystal-clear river. You only saw by what it distorted. It flowed into Tursane, and she glowed. At first, a subtle glow around her edges, then brighter and brighter, until she looked like a rainbow was about to burst from her skin. Her snakes waved in the air, thrashing either in pain or ecstasy, changing colors as magic poured into her, into them. Then it stopped. Like a sudden summer shower, it stopped, and the day cleared, suspiciously cool and bright. I forced myself to take in a shaky breath and walked over to them. "Carelian, are you okay?" He looked a bit wild, all his fur puffed up, but his ears weren't laid back, though his tail jerked around.
"That was a rush I hope to never experience again,"
he said slowly in my mind. His entire body shook, and his fur started to smooth back, though his eyes were so dilated as to be black. "Bridget, are you okay?" I asked. Her eyes were about as wide as Carelian's, and she was panting a bit. Not from fear, I hoped. Tursane pulled her hand away, and I blinked. The tattoo was gone. Bridget moved her head incrementally and looked at me. "Yes, I okay. Kitty?" she asked, patting Carelian. "He's fine." "Snake lady?" she asked, eyes still so wide she looked almost deranged. At that question, I turned to Tursane, who was curled up on her tail, looking like she'd stuck her finger in a light socket. "That is a good question. Tursane, are you okay?" I had been unaware she had nictitating membranes until multiple lids opened and closed over her slit pupil eyes. They were blown open too, and a shudder ran through her.
"I thank you for the inquiry. I am fine, if a bit drunk. Yes, drunk. That was unexpected."
"What was?" I asked, worrying that I had caused her to get hurt in some way.
"Corey, how many people on your planet are mages?"
The question surprised me, and I reached for my phone to figure out the answer. But of course it wasn't there. I tried to remember that stat. I think about 40% are magician or higher. They think maybe as much as another 30% are hedge mages, but they almost never use magic.
"And of those, how many would meet the restrictions you provided me? What would the number be?"
I did the math in my head. Not fast, but I did it. 7 billion and 40%, that would be about 2.80 billion. And if half of 1% of those were like Bridget, you'd be looking at quite a few. I finished my thought out loud. Maybe 14 million? I mean, that is just a guess.
"Oh."
She sounded shocked, and if I didn't know better, I'd almost think she was about to pass out.
That might explain it. Those unable to wield magic are very rare in our realms. I'd figured a few hundred, maybe a few thousand at most. Millions.
She started to giggle, and I stared at her in shock. Tersane, giggling didn't seem like anything I'd have expected.
Mayhaps I should call my Malkin,
Carelian asked, and he looked as freaked out as me, his tail puffing back up.
I'm fine, just a bit overwhelmed. Salastra will be chewing diamonds. She will be so mad and jealous.
Tersane gave herself a shake and pulled herself back up to her full, imposing height.
I thank you, Harold, for the boon you have granted Spirit today. I feel what I was given was in much greater value than what you asked.
She stood there a minute, gazing at me and around the campus.
Yes, I think this is the best way.
One of the snakes, it had hard red, yellow, and black bands around it, slithered off her skull and onto her hand. Okay, that was both cool and creepy. They can separate from her head?
Give me your arm.
The imperious statement had me sighing. At this rate, I was going to have a full sleeve of tattoos, and none of them were things I had chosen. Well, I did like the cat nose and whiskers, but still. I held out my arm, the cat nose and whiskers on the inside of my left arm, then the simple green snake from Tersane, and the unicorn horn, with 4 segments, an indicator as to my debt to Salastra. I took a deep breath, expecting another bite. The snake slithered down her arm and wrapped around mine. It was warm and smooth, the scales rasping as it slid over my skin. As it circled my arm, looking for a place to bite, I assumed. It shrank, getting smaller, until it was only about 3 inches long. With a sudden move, it slid under my skin and started to slither toward the location of the snake tattoo. I shrieked as it moved inside my arm, positioning itself to the same location as the tattoo. I clawed at my arm, my entire body revolting at the wiggling, crawling sensation under my skin. Then it floated up to the surface of my skin and melted down into the existing snake tattoo. The colors of the tat changed to black, red, and yellow. Merlin's balls! What was that? I was still frantically patting my arm, hyperventilating, but there was only skin. Nothing was there, though my body still shuddered in remembered horror.
A little token. Should you need me, touch the snake and call my name. I trust you will not abuse that gift.
Her attitude should have been serious, but she still looked like she was stoned. I kept shuddering and rubbing my arm, managing to bite back the shrieks of, "Get it out!" by sheer self-preservation. It was a good thing I didn't have a knife. I might have cut it out. No abusing, I babbled, my hands shaking with the desire to claw the snake out.
Then I believe it is time for me to leave.
She turned and glanced at Camp.
And I think you have learned your lesson from trying to bait our Harold.
I followed her gaze, and Camp was standing there, no longer stone, but just as white.
Yes, ma'am. So noted.
She gave one searching glance at me, then turned and slithered back to the rip. It closed up behind her, and a level of tension evaporated from the area. I knelt next to Bridget. You sure you're okay? Focusing on her and not my arm.
Yes. Can I go home now?
She asked, her voice plaintive. The space on her temple where the tattoos used to be empty, revealing pale, freckled skin. Yes, I think so. I turned to look at Camp, who nodded in a jerky motion. Let's call your mom. The smile that spread over Bridget's face was blinding. It made me think maybe I hadn't screwed up. Chapter 17. Section 1.3.1. All mages that retaliate to a draft officer with magic will face the equivalent of a court-martial. If found guilty, their draft service shall be doubled.
I would like to know exactly what happened.
Harold Leafond stared at me, his arms crossed as he sat behind the desk in the office. He'd aged since I last saw him, about 3 years ago. There was more silver at his temples, more belly at his waist, and the stress lines added to his serious demeanor. But he still had the same attitude he had that day outside the house, when I had to face down him and his agents. There, Tursane, Salstra, and Bob, the representative of chaos, had made an indelible impression on everyone involved. I was still vaguely amused that I hadn't been arrested or shot on sight. Camp had provided Bridget's phone, and we had called her very relieved mother. She would be here in another hour or so to pick up the girl. Carelian was acting as babysitter. I'd been sequestered shortly afterward in the politest manner possible, telling me the director wanted to speak to me. The time to wait had probably been a mistake on their part. It gave me time to pull myself together and make sure that I'd meet Leafone as a dragon, even if I was still dressed in shorts and a tank top. And no matter how much I just wanted to dissolve into a babble fest, I needed to keep what advantages I had. Which part? Where you set up a group of mages to be killed? Where I found an option you hadn't considered? Or where I saved the life of an innocent? I smiled at him. My hair was in a braid, and I'd managed to wash my face, so while not looking elegant, I didn't look a wreck.
Monroe,
he growled, and I kept the half-smile on my face. I'm sorry, but am I under arrest? If not, I believe I am missing classes.
They are cancelled,
He snapped.
and I needed answers from you. What happened?
You should know. After all, you were about to sentence a girl to death. I kept my voice perfectly level, even if my hands fisted tight enough to drive the nails into my palm.
That wasn't me,
He stated, glaring at me. And here I thought the boss was in charge of his minions' actions. Does that mean you'll now sacrifice camp on the altar of your mission? He settled back into his chair, my attempt to get a rise out of him failing.
What my employees do or don't do is not your affair. Explain what you ordered that thing to do.
I arched a brow at him and wished Tursane was here to have him call her that. He wouldn't survive the experience. I did not order Tursane to do anything. I asked if she could drain magic from Bridget and make her no longer a mage. If she couldn't do magic, then the laws didn't apply to her, and she could go home.
And that is all you did?
His voice had a dangerous tone, and I thought about how much information he might have gathered in the 2 hours I'd waited. The way I phrased it asked her to do it to all mages incapable of using their magic in accordance with the laws.
And she just did your bidding?
Ha! The laugh burst out of me, and I clawed my reserve back into place. Tursane does not do anything I bid. Think of her more as... I paused, trying to think of the correct analogy. There isn't anything I can compare her to. She's a demigod. And I suspect she thinks of me as a pet, so the best analogy I can make is I'm a blasted dog begging for treats, and she gives them to me because I'm cute. I threw up my hands in exasperation. Holding on to being an arrogant Merlin was hard, and since I didn't understand Tursane, how was I supposed to explain her to anyone? He stared at me until I was clenching my leg muscles to not fidget.
I can't decide if I should curse you for your arrogance and find something to sentence you under, or say thank you.
I managed not to start. It helped that he looked like he would prefer to bury me in an unmarked grave. And why is that?
Whatever trick your friend did, any mage that was mentally deficient, injured, and unable to use their magic, and even a few with Alzheimer's, are no longer mages. Down to not having any mage tattoos. We managed a few tests and all of them come up as norms. Not a shred of magic in them.
I nodded, trying not to let my reactions appear on my face. Maybe people like Kelly wouldn't be able to kill. That would be preferable, and I still wondered if it had been the right thing to do.
My question is exactly what do we now owe that creature?
What did you promise?
He sat forward, his eyes never leaving my face.
What did you give in exchange?
My arm twitched as I imagined I could feel the snake slithering under the skin again, and I gritted my teeth. Nothing. It was a gift to me that I could ask her a favor. I did. I didn't say anything else about the other marks, or the Merlin-blessed snake. Even thinking about it made me want to gag. He sat there in silence, me with my legs crossed under me so I wouldn't fidget, him just glaring at me. I don't know how much longer we would have stayed there if a spike of pain through my temple hadn't caused me to flinch. He jerked upright, frowning at me, but before he could speak, a rip opened along the wall in the office where we sat.
What in the world?
He growled, turning and pulling a pistol from the small of his back. It was up and pointed at the rip in a fast, smooth move. I had to give him points. The form was accurate, and I had no doubt at all he could use it. Salistra stuck her head in through the opening. Her current size meant her head took up the same amount of space as a very large human.
What are you doing here?
Demanded Lifon. I suppressed a sigh.
Corazon Monroe, how could you? Tersane is all but drunk. She has so much power. You gave her all that power, and now she's going to lord it over the rest of us for eons. And you didn't even ask me.
Her voice was sharp like a dagger through my mind, and I stifled a sob and saw Harold groan and clutch his temple.
I'd forgotten how very much that hurts,
he muttered, exhaling sharply through his nose.
After all I've done for you, and I get dismissed like that.
Salistra, her head in the rip, jabbing her sharp horn at me, ignoring him completely.
Now I can see why she likes you so much. You invited Esmir also, didn't you? Did you invite?
The pain that lashed inside my head at the real name of Bob slashed through me and gave me a bloody nose. Enough! I didn't ask you because I owe you, not you owe me. And I didn't know it would work that way, though I probably should have. And I won't be doing anything like that ever again. No, I didn't invite Esmir. Frankly, I expected to die. I didn't quite shout the words, but I found myself standing and glaring at her, ignoring the horn that could kill me without any issue.
Still, Tersane keeps telling me how smart you are. Why didn't you think to invite me?
It was an outraged huff, and the tip of the horn got closer to me all the time. Because you are a drama queen and go and pull stunts like this. I jumped as Esmir spoke, and I felt her walk behind me. I heard Harold cuss, but I was too busy paying attention to the new complication.
I am not a drama queen. I am Salistra, and she of all people should understand my due. What good are humans if they forget us when they have excess magic they wish to expend?
The ideas laden in that sentence made my head spin. Salistra, I said quietly as she whipped her head to look at me, the horn grazing my chest. I promise, next time I have excess magic to get rid of, I'll summon all of you, okay? She glared at me, first out of one eye, then turning her head, stared at me with the other, then huffed.
See that you do. If it is sufficient, I may erase the debt you owe me.
Without another word, she yanked her head back, and the portal closed. I swear she's only happy when virgins are plaiting flowers in her hair prior to her corrupting them. Are you okay, Corey? Esmir sat in front of me, looking me in the eyes. Do I need to eat him for you? She cast a look at Lifon, who really didn't look worried enough. No, thank you, I replied on automatic. Shame. She wandered over and rubbed the side of her face against mine. That was amusing, though. I wonder how long her high will last. If nothing else, Corey, you are entertaining. With that, she vanished, only the smallest pinprick of pain telling me it was a portal opening, not a sidestep. Why me? I muttered under my breath.
You know, Monroe, I think I'm starting to believe you that you are their pet, though the cat seems to like you, what with the rubbing.
His voice was bland, and I reached up, touching my face. Don't read too much into that. She was marking me as hers, though how that works between her and Carelian, I have no idea. Either way, I seem to be the property of multiple beings. I touched my tattoo, then my arm with the markings from each of the realms.
I see.
I winced and knew it showed on my face as I remembered where I was and who I was talking to. I never seem to remember some people were the enemy unless they were absolute jerks. Is there anything else I can answer for you?
There are many questions I have. However, I am not going to say I am displeased at having fewer mages, especially those that put my people in positions where they have to make decisions that are not easy to live with.
I nodded at that. I still had issues with what happened, but Bridget was alive. That thought sustained me at the moment. With a bit of effort, I pulled my serene persona back to myself. It was getting easier to do, but was that a good thing or a bad thing?
Is this going to be a habit of yours?
Do I look insane? The words burst out of my mouth, and I sighed and closed my eyes, clenching my fists. Let me rephrase. If I could have thought of any option other than the one I took, given the time I had, I would have gone with it. He sat up, elbows on the desk, and hands clasped. His attention on me was absolute, and I just smiled, even as my stomach grumbled.
My problem, Monroe, is that you are dangerous. And while you could argue all mages are dangerous, you are worse. You don't see the limitations inherent to magic, or worse, you don't have those limitations. You are a destabilizing factor in a system that is rather precisely balanced.
By killing people that don't allow themselves to be limited? I asked, a bit of annoyance slipping into my voice.
Yes.
His answer was automatic, and I blinked in surprise. I'd expected dissembling, or something.
I don't owe you any answers, but in the spirit of cooperation, as I believe you may be around for a long time, I will. Mages are deadly. You saw what happened when one with limited ability to control her skills had a temper tantrum. You were there in the cafeteria when the other girl overdosed.
I started to open my mouth to argue, but his hard look had me snapping it closed, and I nodded for him to go on.
You have had first-hand experience as to how dangerous someone who can't control themselves or their magic can be. I get no pleasure out of ordering people to be executed. But can you imagine the fear and riots that would occur should a mage lose control like that in public? There would be witch hunts, and mages would retaliate, and the whole damn world would fall into chaos.
His hands slammed down on the desk, making me start, and he leaned forward, eyes intent.
If keeping our society in one piece means others have to die, so be it. It has always been like that no matter what lies we like to tell ourselves.
I gritted my teeth and kept still.
But that leaves me with you. I have no doubt you will make it through whatever pressure we could put you under. And while I still feel you are the most dangerous person around, executing you is not an option.
The temptation to smirk rode high, but I didn't move, even if my muscles were trembling with the desire to slap him.
However, I believe you have more constraints on your actions than I originally thought, though it remains to be seen if they keep you on the straight and narrow or make you into a rogue. Either way, you will be watched, and don't think I'll hesitate to take you out if there is any opportunity.
Lifon pulled a small manila envelope out of his jacket.
This class is going back to what has always worked in the past. You are free to stay anywhere you want. There are 3 classes held from 1 to 5 the rest of this week to teach you payroll, benefits, vacation, and all the other stuff that comes with the draft. Then you are expected to report to your assignment. There is time built in to find a place to live.
The envelope slid across the desk to me. I didn't touch it quite yet.
Your assignment is in there.
He paused and shook his head.
I've loathed everything you and your friends have managed to do over the last few years. But now, I'm almost curious to see how you handled this. If nothing else, it won't be boring.
He nodded once, pushed away from the desk, and left the room before I even had a chance to say anything.
I groaned. Why me?
I stared at the envelope like it was a trap, which it was. I didn't bother to look inside. I wanted to check on Bridget and Carelian and get my phone back. Getting to take a shower wouldn't hurt my feelings either. 10 minutes later, I was back at my dorm, and my phone hung in a bag on the doorknob. It got tossed on the bed, and I went in search of Carelian. He lay sprawled on the floor of Bridget's room, purring, and enjoying Bridget petting him while she babbled to the woman sitting on her bed. She looked up at me, and I saw the same red hair and green eyes. But what really set me at ease was the sheer relief I saw in her eyes. "You must be Corey," she said as she rose off the bed. I nodded, still a bit freaked out from the theatrics with Salastra and Esmir. She engulfed me in a hug so tight I couldn't breathe, but I just let her hold me. The lack of oxygen had started to become an issue when she stepped away. Tears glistened in her eyes. "Thank you. Bridget and your familiar explained what happened. I was worried, but I didn't think they'd go this far. But you've saved her. I've been torn since she emerged, and while she made it through high school, there was no chance of college, and they took her and—" She stopped and took a deep breath, blinking back tears. "Just thank you. She is my daughter. Maybe not what I expected, but I love her all the same." I shifted, uncomfortable with the thanks. "I'm just glad it worked. It was, well, I wasn't about to tell her how close her daughter came to being killed. She'll be okay." I smiled at Carelian. Though both of them might be going through withdrawal, he doesn't often get doted on this much.
"Which is a crime. I should be treated like this all the time."
Bridget's mother smiled at Carelian's comment, but focused on me. "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Margaret O'Keefe, and your friend has been very generous with his time." She sat back down, smiling at her daughter. "Did you get your stuff back? Have they told you anything?" I was hesitant to pry, but I still worried there were consequences beyond the obvious. "Yes, they returned her phone." Her voice got tight on those words. That did provide me a significant amount of stress. "They want to test her before we leave, to make sure she really isn't a mage anymore. But then she is free. We both are." The woman looked ecstatic, and I smiled. At least I'd done something right. "Then I'm glad you two are happy." I walked over to the desk and wrote my number down on a pad of paper with the pen laying there. "Here's my number. If anything happens, call me." Margaret looked doubtful, but I squeezed her hand. "Really? Call. Thank you. Thank you so much for everything." She looked like she might start crying again, and I kicked Carelian's tail. "Take care. Bye, Bridget." I managed to make my voice semi-chirpy. Carelian stood and wound around her before heading to the door. "Kitty, go?" She sagged a bit, watching him wait at the door. "Yes, but you get to go home." "Home. Bye, Kitty. Bye, Corey." She waved at both of us, then stood looking at her mother. "Home?" "Just about. Let's get your stuff." I let them be and headed to my room. I needed a shower, and I needed to deal with the assignment in my pocket. Either way, it would get me out of this disaster and let me start working. I was really hoping for a lab position, something that would use my degree. "You good?" I asked Carelian as we walked back to my room. He didn't answer as I grabbed clothes to change into and plugged in my phone to charge.
"I am unsure. What you did for Bridget was good. She is too sweet to be a mage. But..."
The word hung in my mind like a question mark. I headed to the showers. Wind had kicked up dust and dirt, and it had mixed with my sweat, making me feel and look like I'd been through a tornado.
What will the consequences be?
He spoke as I washed my hair. Days like this, I missed my short hair. I don't know. Tersane seems happy with me, even if I'm trying not to scream every time I think about the snake under my skin. I couldn't resist rubbing it as I spoke, the sensation of it wiggling into my muscles and under my skin still haunting me.
Malkin found it amusing, but it got the attention of a lot of beings, other lords of the realms, and even Bob.
I groaned, leaning back to rinse my hair. I don't need any more tattoos, thank you.
I do not want to lose my queens. Your triad is too strong. They will fear you.
Who is they? I rinsed off and grabbed the towel, wrapping it around me. I was going to be perfectly happy going home this afternoon. I missed my own bathroom.
The other lords.
He sounded wary and worried. That did not help my emotions. Well, they can take it up with Tersane. I'm still not sure about that entire thing and a bit freaked out at the idea I could give her permission to do anything. But either way, it is over. I want to get dressed, finish a class on the paperwork, pack up, and figure out where I need to go for my assignment. I walked back into the room where he lay sprawled out on the bed. And getting a decent bed to sleep in also would be nice. Wonder if I can just sidestep to work. That idea had serious merit, and I would need to consider it.
I will be glad to be home. Your bed is much more comfortable than this thing. Though, I have decided I need more pets,
he stated, not lifting his head from the bed. Uh-huh. Bridget spoiled you. I pulled on clothes and finished toweling dry my hair. Definitely a bun day.
That was simply treating me appropriately,
he countered with a yawn. Spoiled, I shot back as I sat down at the desk and stared at the envelope.
Worth it,
he purred.
So, where are we going?
I took a deep breath and picked up the envelope and slit it open. Let's find out. I started reading slowly, saying key words out loud. Assigned to the ambassador as a liaison. Starts in 2 weeks. Located in D.C. Ugh. And are they kidding? Merlin's balls, they are idiots! I yelled that last word, and Carelian jerked up, looking around.
What? What happened? Where are you being placed?
I turned to look at Carelian. The Japanese embassy in D.C. I snarled. He blinked at me, then started laughing. He didn't quit until I threw the pillow at him and threatened to make him eat the familiar food in the cafeteria.
You would never do that, and if you attempted, I would either hunt or go see if my other, kinder queens would feed this poor, starving Cath.
I let it go. I had 2 weeks before I needed to be there. I was going home. Chapter 18. Section 2.23.2. Every mage will be assessed at the end of their orientation for the best fit for them with the needs of the draft. They may be shuffled to different duties during their service to ensure the best use of varied skill sets. I packed up and sidestepped home. I spent the rest of that week sidestepping to the classes on how you had to report time, policies, and all the other administrative things that seemed to go with any job. The odd thing was it didn't matter what agency I might work with, the draft office still paid my salary. I didn't care enough to figure out the accounting logistics, though I enjoyed my base rate. Having a doctorate helped, even if I owed them a decade. There were notes about hazard pay, extenuating circumstances, and even death benefits. That made me sigh, but I carefully put Joe and Sable on everything. If I died, they'd each get half. Carelian, what happens to you if I die?
I grieve.
That isn't what I meant. Do you go home? Do you die? Terror gripped me at the idea he might die because I did. I was at my desk at the apartment, trying to finish filing all the paperwork and setting up retirement accounts. He lay on his bed that he'd dragged out from under mine. He swapped between sleeping under my bed or next to it. though I suspected he slept on my bed when I wasn't in it.
Normally, yes, but I am bound to my queens by choice as surely as I am bound to you. It would hurt, but I would still be Carelian, and they would still be my queens.
Bound? I didn't like that word. It smacked too much of slavery.
Quit being human. I chose. I am satisfied with my choice. I have faith that whatever our ends, ours will be ones to be proud of.
He draped his tail over his nose, his eyes closed. I sighed and finished up the paperwork. Laundry and packing next. My laundry was all clean, but I needed to fold, put away, and then figure out what to wear for my first week of school. "Corey, you home?" I heard Sable call out from the front room. "In here, packing." I had just finished putting a pile of undergarments I knew I wanted to take with me on the bed when Sable pushed open the door. "Packing for?" she asked and flopped on the bed, her ring glowing a bit brighter since it was near me. Joe and Sable had matching bands on their right ring fingers, whereas their marriage bands were on their left. Figured I'd head up a few days early, get a hotel, and make sure I know where I'm going. She frowned, sitting up. "I thought we decided you'd stay here and just sidestep." I nodded. "I am, but I have no idea about where to sidestep to, so I need to go there, find a few places, make sure I know where I'm supposed to be and how to get there." "Ah, makes sense. You flying?" "It's in D.C. I thought maybe I'd take the train, enjoy the trip. That way Carelian could come." We'd flown once, and he refused to do it ever again. He detested being up in the air, but we were both too worried about what causing a rip out of an airplane would do, much less where he might land. It was a very long trip to Vegas. He had sidestepped back. "That makes sense. Okay." She laid back down. I laughed and went over to the bed, sitting down next to my headboard and buried my toes under her back. "So, what's up?" "Joe's birthday is a month away. Our first one since we got married. I have no clue what to get her. Or you, for that matter, but I have a lot more time until you." "Ah, you're right. I was going to cheat and give her one of the books I found in James Wells' library. It's all the design schematics from the owner of Indian Motorcycles. Why Wells had it, I have no idea, but it looked neat and might convince her to custom build you one. You know, that's what she's been thinking about, starting a custom bike shop. Not that she wants to start it until we can all move to New York." "Oh, that is a great idea, but that doesn't help me." "I suppose a date night is too plebeian for you two?" I teased, tickling her with my toes. "Stop that. And yes, I want something awesome." Sable held my toes down so I couldn't wiggle them. "What is the first anniversary gift type?" "Paper or clocks?" "How lame is that?" Sable sulked, pushing her curls off her face. "Like she wants reams of paper." I snickered. With her dyslexia, reading would never be her favorite thing to do, and Joe really did prefer hands-on. "Oh, I have an idea, and it plays double duty. There's a paper-making class I saw in one of the art magazines here in Atlanta. Why don't you take that and make stationery for Marisol and a bunch of thank you cards to use as we go through life? Custom made by mages." I snickered at that. Sable sat up. "Make her own paper. Oh, that could be fun. I could send letters on that to Mom's relatives, and my Aunt LaShawna would enjoy that as a gift too. She loves creating baby baskets for friends. Having those as custom cards would be cute. That is a great idea. Thanks, Corey." She sat up and kissed my knee as I rolled my eyes at her. "Hey, thank Carelian. I only saw it because I was picking up the magazine he scattered at the grocery store the other day."
"There was a bee. It needed to die."
"Bees make honey," I retorted. It was an old argument.
"It was not that type of bee."
His response was icy. Sable laughed as she bent over to pet him. "You still pissed off about getting stung?"
"Yes."
The mental word was almost a hiss of annoyance. I think he's still more pissed about his face swelling up and us laughing at him. Don't go poking your nose in bees' business. They'll fight dirty. I slid off the bed, heading to my closet.
"I fight dirtier."
He huffed, then stretched out for Sable to worship him properly. Though, if I get her this for her birthday, what am I going to do for our anniversary? Sable faced me, but her gaze had turned inward. Well, save that for her anniversary and take her out for an evening of dancing. Or get her a new corset. The leather one she has is getting worn out. Aha! Corset! Perfect! Sable's entire face lit up. I know exactly what to get her. Good, because I need to make sure I have business formal wear. I stared forlornly at my closet. And I don't. What? Sable moved over, putting her chin on my shoulder as she peered at my clothes. How can you have so little? And yeah, I see what you mean. They are mostly statement pieces. Ugh, I don't want to go clothes shopping. It was more of a grumble than a whine, but it didn't change the sentiment. Too bad. Though, she trailed off. I'm worried about your assignment. Her words dashed the happy, fuzzy feeling I'd let myself sink into. You too? Corey, I don't think they have forgotten what you did. Or do you think they didn't tell their people here? She pulled back and looked at me worried. Oh, probably. But that was, what, almost 4 years ago? Surely they can't have held on to the grudge for that long. Sable gave me a look. This is the country that still reviles the name of a samurai who betrayed their emperor in the 1300s. Yes, I think they can. Honestly, after the bombs during World War II, I'm surprised they even have an embassy in the U.S. I shrugged. I looked it up. They've always had one. But from what I could figure out, most of the time there isn't anyone there. Not like an ambassador. It's just staff to take notes and send messages. They will know you. And him. She pointed at Carelian. Unless you're leaving him behind.
No, she is not. She is first queen. I go where she goes. If you need me, call and I will be there. But I go with her.
We both turned to look at Carelian. He hadn't moved from his bed, still curled up in a tight ball, but his voice had no give to it. There is that answer. Means the hotel I find needs to be one that caters to familiars. Not that he can't open doors or even use keycards if he wants. I'm going to have to put you back in the harness, if nothing else so you can use cards and get indoors. He grumbled slightly, but didn't argue. Sidestepping only worked if you knew where you were stepping to or were insane, like when I stepped to Japan. Here, at home, we always had an area that was kept clear so I could sidestep to it. Magic tended to protect you, but that didn't mean you needed to be stupid. And what was the title you were assigned? Sable asked, a thoughtful tone to her voice. I thought for a minute, then shook my head. I wasn't, just assigned to the State Department as the liaison to the ambassador for the Japanese embassy. Huh. Then business professional, Sable stated, with way more assurance than I ever felt when it came to clothes. You have good jackets, but you need more slacks. Those jean slacks, they are comfortable and I know what size I am. I moved to the computer to order them. I'd bookmarked that manufacturer years ago. Oh, you're no fun. Sable gave me a pout. I was completely unmoved. You want shopping? Grab Joe. You want someone who always has a med kit and can save your life? Then you want me. I'd finally taken Joe's nagging to heart and learned to tolerate exercise. I'd become an avid hiker, as Carelian loved it. It kept me in shape, and there were lots of places to go. It also made me popular with the search and rescue teams, as Carelian could beat most rescue dogs hands down. I'd gotten my certification after the debacle in New York. It let me mix my skills and gave me an excuse to stay in shape. Fine, be that way. You probably need some shells. DC's muggy. She referred to the light tops you wore under jackets when you didn't plan on taking off the jacket often. Point. I added a few shells into the cart. I did love this designer. Sable just rolled her eyes. You'll be fine. Where are you staying? You are way ahead of me in the thoughts department. I'm still trying to figure out how to get there. Then figure out what in the world they are going to do with me. I have a doctorate in quantitative biology. What do I know about relationships between countries? Much less Japan, who hates me. You know all the rules. What happens if you fail at an assignment? Sable asked, sitting back on the bed. They're not rules, they're laws. And I paused, running through them again. Nothing? They can reassign me, fire me, but I still work for the draft board, so they just place me elsewhere. For the first time in years, I thought about Paul Goines, the mage who had double emerged when 3 of his co-workers died. He hadn't been liked and had hated it there. I did not want to become him. Then go, do your best. Just remember they are out to get you. I snorted. That has been made abundantly clear. What about you? Any reaction about marriage or the joining? I pointed to our rings. And we still need to play around with the changes. I was referring to the changes in our magic. No. Sable twisted a ring and smiled up at me. But I'm still happy you said yes. I worried about ambushing you like that. I'll admit to sheer shock, but it prevented me from overthinking it. So probably a good thing. That was what Joe said. If we proposed, if that's the right term, and gave you time, you'd have torn it apart and rebuilt it in horrible ways for months. Probably. But yeah, maybe Esmir, when she is done being amused by Tersane, will come explain it to me. Sable giggled. I wish I could have seen that. No, you don't. Tersane is imposing most days. When she showed up like that, she was terrifying. I looked at the new snake on my arm and sighed. Oh well, Washington. I need a decent hotel, and not top of the line. This is all coming out of my pocketbook, and I haven't received the first paycheck yet. And get you train tickets, and get him a snazzy harness. Or maybe. She paused, looking at Carelian. For his part, he twitched and curled up tighter, likely sensing indignities in the future. He did look adorable in the vest. If you want him to go to parties and have people underestimate him, a tuxedo vest might be worth it. She sounded very serious, but I was laughing. I have a work vest for him. There is also the S&R vest plus the wedding vest. I snickered. If I dress him up too much, people will assume he is just a big animal. Besides, if he doesn't want to wear them, I'm sure not making him. Exactly. It's camouflage. No one would realize that he's probably more intelligent than half the people there.
Camouflage? A way to stalk prey without them realizing I am about to pounce.
Exactly. Plus, it will let you carry simple things and not interfere with your movement. And most people still don't realize you have opposable thumbs. Sable peered over the bed at him. Sound good?
No, but disguising a hunter is always wise. I will submit to your camouflage.
Sable managed to repress most of her squeal of delight and sprang over to where I was on the computer. I know just the place to order them from. I gave in to the inevitable and concentrated on not letting her get Carelian something embarrassing, laughing the entire time. Chapter 19 Section 1.50.1 No mage shall be required to offer more than 75% of easily available offering, hair, nails, for any job or required task, nor can they be required to utilize anything saved or personal possessions. If the mage so chooses to, they have the right, but their possessions are theirs. The train ride up to D.C. from Atlanta had been nice, and Carelian had watched out the window, though he muttered about the lack of hammocks.
I still do not understand how it is always the same. You say if we take this ride a year from now, it would be the same outside?
Yes, unless we have changed something like tearing down a building or cutting down a tree.
That is both amazing and boring.
He kept watching out the window, though, and I didn't have an answer. I'd arranged for a rideshare to pick us up and take us to a hotel a few blocks from where I was supposed to be Monday morning, giving us all day Sunday to explore. While there were a few looks at Carelian, most people just moved out of his way. Sunday, we explored the Capitol, and while we didn't do any museums, it was fun to find good places to sidestep to that looked like they were almost never populated. Maybe I could come back some weekend. Carelian was especially interested in the Natural History Museum and thought Esmir might find it entertaining as well. I called Stephen and Indira to see if they had any advice and let them know all the drama that had occurred. They were both aghast at what had been going on and worried about what Tersane had done. The consequences of that might be years down the road. On Monday, I hung on to the mantra of starting off like you plan to continue. None of my work attire was drab or boring. I headed to work that morning in sensible, low-heeled boots, my jean slacks, a vivid burgundy top, and an asymmetrical jacket in steel gray. Carelian walked beside me in a vest of gray, with a pocket for the card key and a clip for his own badge. Stephen had warned me they might require him to have one, so I was prepared. I walked into the building a full hour before I was supposed to be there. While I knew who I was meeting and where the building was, office numbers and processes had not been included in my assignment, which I figured was on purpose. Steeling myself, I walked toward the security desk, scanning the metal detectors that employees were starting to go through. My start time was 8:30. I figured an hour was enough time to get everything done. Good morning, I'm Merlin Monroe. I start here today and I'm supposed to meet Daniel Lorison. Carelian rose up on his hind legs, putting his front paws on the desk. When he did that, he was barely shorter than me. And this is my familiar, Carelian. The security guard, an older Hispanic man, paled a bit, and I saw two guards paying very close attention to us. I had my phone in my purse. I pulled it out and set it on the counter. This way, if I needed to pull up an electric shield because someone got too jumpy, I wouldn't fry my phone. Before the security guard could speak, a man in a suit walked out of a door behind the desk and stepped over to us.
I have this, Officer Ruiz.
The man shifted his attention to me. He was at least 40, skin the color of graphite, with short, tightly napped hair, an unmarked temple, and no evidence of laugh lines.
I'm Lieutenant Strivent. Let me check if you are on the list.
I curved my lips, still watching the tense guards. I wasn't sure if it was me or Carelian causing this stress.
Corazon Monroe. Identification, please.
He said the words with no warmth, but I pulled my state ID out of my purse, handing it to him, my Merlin status clearly marked on the ID. He tapped a few more buttons.
Very well, Miss Monroe. We need to get you a badge and...
He paused, giving Carelian a hard look.
Will he go where you go?
It's Merlin Monroe or Dr. Monroe, depending on your mood. And he goes most places I go, though he has little interest in human waste disposal methods outside needing to use the facilities. I kept my face perfectly straight as he blinked and glanced at Carelian.
Then he'll need a badge too. Name?
Carelian Telash Zionis,
Carelian said, and I saw the man jerk, but he nodded and wrote it down.
Is all the other information correct?
I don't know. I haven't seen the information. I replied, and his jaw clenched. This was almost as much fun as tweaking a Lexant back in the day. He lifted up the computer screen and turned it toward me. It showed only my information. It had an old picture of me, addresses, family, etc. It all looks correct. I thought about mentioning the marital status, but to be honest, the laws didn't count it as married, but they didn't not count it as married. I decided not to mention it.
Excellent. Move over here, please.
He gestured to a station to the side that looked like a camera. I grabbed my bag and moved over. He tapped a red dot on the camera. All too aware that he'd love for me to look awful, I made sure the smile was on my face before I focused on the dot. It flashed, and he nodded.
Now you're familiar.
Carelian went up on hind legs and bared all his teeth. I saw multiple people flinch back. The lieutenant took his picture and nodded.
I will get your badges ready. It will give you access to all the areas you require. If it doesn't give you access to an area, you don't need to be there.
I would have taken offense, except it sounded so rote I suspected he said that to everyone. Thank you. I looked around. Was I just supposed to stand here and wait for my contact to show up?
There is a waiting room over there. Mr. Lorison will meet you shortly. I will provide him with your badges.
He directed me to a small area with chairs and 3 walls and no windows. It felt too much like a shooting gallery. Either way, I walked in and positioned myself against one of the walls so I could see anyone walking into the area. I had expected much more paperwork, but maybe all the time we spent in class doing it had paid off. All I could do was hope that Lorison showed up early. He didn't. At exactly 8:30 on the dot, a man walked into the waiting area. He was about 5'10", with white blonde hair, ice blue eyes, a three-piece suit, and wingtips. I pushed away from the wall, as I was the only person there. I didn't see he could be anyone else except my contact. "Mr. Lorison?" I asked, walking over to him.
"Nice to see you are punctual."
He scanned me up and down and sighed.
"Not my style preference, but you will do. First, here's your badge. Where's your familiar?"
Carelian had been laying behind some of the chairs, doing that specific Cath sort of invisibility, where until he moved, he was almost impossible to see. At the question, Carelian stood up, and I could feel his soft laugh at the start Lorison gave. He looked at the picture on the badge, then handed it to me.
"He will need to wear it at all times, as will you."
He cleared his throat and stood up a bit straighter.
"My name is Daniel Lorison. You will refer to me as Mr. Lorison, Adjutant Lorison, or Adjutant Daniel Lorison, depending on the situation. How should I refer to you?"
Part of me wanted to laugh, but I kinda admired the way he stated his expectations so clearly. Technically, I am Merlin Dr. Corazon Monroe, but that seems a bit ridiculous. At work, I would prefer Merlin Monroe, but my friends just call me Corey. I somehow doubted he would become a friend, but I could hope.
"Very well, then. Merlin Monroe, this way, if you please. Pay attention to where we go, as I will expect you to find your own way in the future. Your badge will get you anywhere you need to go. If there is a keypad, assume you do not need to go there."
He walked and talked with exacting precision, and we ended up in a room with 3 cubicles and 2 offices.
"This is the office for East Asia and Pacific Affairs."
He walked into the smaller office and nodded at a chair before taking a seat behind the desk.
"Japan, while they have an embassy here since September 1949, has not been particularly active. Until the last decade, they have attended social functions and signed multi-nation accords, but little else. Our trade agreements with them are rudimentary. However, since the death of James Wells, they have stepped up their interactions, pressuring the government and the estate of James Wells for access to his research notes and his valuables. I am sure you are well aware of this."
I had a sinking feeling I knew where this was going. "I am. I convinced them killing me was not in their best interest. Or more exactly, Jorgaz had."
"Well, we need to lean on your goodwill."
I arched an eyebrow, suddenly annoyed. I am not required to give up personal possessions as part of the draft laws. In fact, it is explicitly called out that I am not required to sacrifice anything beyond 75% of easily available offerings during my duties. I cannot be required to spend blood or other offerings, much less give up personal possessions. His smile was tight.
"Of that we are aware, but the need to have a sustained relationship and trade agreement is great."
Lorison took a deep breath, and I prepared for whatever bombshell he had planned on dropping.
"They have come up with a vaccine and pill series that could help prevent or even cure cancer. They are guarding it very jealously, and for all we know, it might not even be real, or what few laboratory reports they have let slip may be falsified. But if it isn't, we need this. Cancer rates for the last few years have doubled across the board, and we are worried the inflation is not natural."
I sat back and looked at him. Thoughts raced through my mind. It was too perfect, too pat of a setup. But why worry about it? Surely if they wanted me dead this badly, they could have killed me. I'd been sloppy the last few years. But the not natural comment set off thoughts, especially given what Carelian had overheard. When you say not natural, what does that mean?
"The rates of people under 30 developing incurable cancer has increased by 20%, and most disturbing, those from magical families or that have already emerged has jumped by 15% in the last 5 years."
Those numbers sounded bad, but I had no idea what it translated into for real numbers, and some cancers like basal cell could be treated while others like myelofibrosis and other blood cancers could be maintained for decades without much else besides drugs. Longer, if there was a mage willing to do marrow manipulation. What exactly are you asking? I thought I knew, but assuming would make my life much more difficult than it already was, and I was curious how much they knew.
We want to offer them access to the research you inherited in exchange for allowing us access to their cancer research and methodologies.
He sat very stiff in the chair, but I suspected that was his normal posture regardless of the situation. It feels like the government is being very free with my possessions. What do I get out of it?
We are prepared to negotiate.
My eyes narrowed. What was going on? I never heard of the government negotiating anything. Carelian was very focused on all of this. Do you believe this?
They want something very special. Ask for the moon. They are in a bad place.
But I don't know what I have that they want, which means I'm playing blind. I protested. I was pretty sure I'd seen a letter from Lucille, but I hadn't bothered to open it yet. Technically, this was the first day of the draft. Okay, what exactly are you offering and asking? Access to research is too wide-ranging. I need specifics. Really, they could have stuck me in a lab. I would have been perfectly happy, or sent me to medical school or anything. Why this runaround? How much of it was because of my power levels, and how much was what James left? Why didn't they just steal it or something? Banks weren't that secure. Daniel wet his lips, fingers still laced.
It is hard to know exactly what we would need access to. Would you have a list of what research and documents he had?
Not at this time. I didn't even know if a list existed. This was getting weirder and weirder by the minute. He shifted, and I swear he was going through a decision tree as to what to talk to me about next.
We are working hand in hand with China regarding these issues. The lead negotiator has asked for your assistance. While you are there, perhaps you could work with the Japanese liaison and offer that you are willing to share the research with them.
I bristled a bit, but kept my cool. Sidestepping home would be way too showy and would tip my hand. But I had to fight my urge to start setting things on fire. Forming the triad with Joe and Sable gave me greater access to their branches, and fire was a greedy gift, loving to be used. It meant not letting my temper get the better of me. I'm not sure why the government, or more accurately, its employees, think I would simply turn over that which is mine. I said, my voice getting cooler, no matter how much I wanted to burn things. His lips tightened, and I realized he didn't like this any more than I did. So why not have fun? That thought made me relax. I am willing to consider it. I want 5 years of my draft waived. He blinked, and I saw him bite down his reaction.
I do not think the government would be willing to do that.
Maybe not, but that is what I'm asking. Granted, until I can be told exactly what research they want copies of, I'm not sure what information I have available to share. He seemed a bit gray around the edges, but nodded.
I will take that under advisement.
So the next question is, has anyone asked if the Japanese are even willing to talk to me? And does the negotiator know I can't legally step foot on Japanese soil? At this, Daniel's perfect mask fell, and an expression of horror and worry settled in.
What exactly are you talking about, Merlin Monroe?
Chapter 20. Section 2.22.2. At no point may a mage be ordered or even instructed to do any action that would place them in violation of existing laws. They may not be punished for refusing to follow an illegal order. I smiled. I never said much about what occurred, just that the royal magician had agreed to relinquish his claim on the inheritance, and the Emperor of Japan had backed him up. Here is what was said. You draw your own conclusions. I pulled up the memory in my mind. Carelian translating had burned it into my memory. Too bad that didn't work with my classes. It would have made some of them much easier. Japan will not interfere with Khorasan Monroe after this point. She is considered anathema to this court, and word will be spread that she is neither to be attacked nor helped. I said each word clearly and slowly, the strange echo of Japanese with Carelian speaking softly in my mind a bit confusing. Daniel settled back again, his expression smooth once again.
That does not sound all that bad.
I gave him a look. Anathema? I am detested or loathed, or even cursed depending on how you look at it.
Maybe they won't know it is you or will have forgotten.
He offered, but even he didn't sound like he believed it. I suppose anything is possible. I looked at my watch and sighed. It was a bit after 9. I can't address anything until after I've gone through the stuff I've inherited. You and your bosses need to decide what you are going to offer me to give up my own possessions. Remember, I could just sell them on the open market or give them to Japan as recompense for the damage I did there, though I still feel that was completely justified. So what do you want to do now? Daniel looked like he wanted to beat his head against the desk, an expression I recognize all too well from most officials that dealt with me.
I'll take you to meet the liaison. It would be helpful if you knew what research Merlin Wells left.
He rose from his desk, and I matched something niggling the back of my mind. Mr. Lorison? I said, before he opened the door.
Yes?
He turned to look at me, waiting. You were only surprised at the amount of time I asked for, not that I wanted the draft shortened. That was actually a guess, but he nodded, a sharp jerk of his chin. How many people think I will die before my draft is over? I could never say why I asked that question. It just leaped out from all the puzzle pieces coming together. He looked at me for a long time, then turned back to the door.
I'm afraid I have no idea what you are talking about, Merlin Monroe.
The way he answered told me everything, and I nodded. We didn't talk as we headed down to a hall with cubicles in the middle and much smaller offices on the other side. As we walked, Carelian garnered more attention than me, but everyone managed to resist the desire to rush out and pet him. I swear, he gave off a pheromone that encouraged it. But today he walked and acted like he had somewhere important to be, and it seemed to work. Daniel stopped at a small office and rapped on the door. A woman, probably about 10 years older than me, looked up from the desk that took up the majority of the room. She had short black hair, parted down the middle, and falling neatly to either side of her face, and stopping at chin level in a sharp bob. It created a black frame for her pale face, narrow nose, and brown eyes. She lacked the normal fold I'd seen on most from Asia. I suspected she was half white, though her skin color and hair screamed Asian. She rose and squeezed around her desk, her body more dumpling than noodle. Lorison? Her voice was sharp and flat, with a softness on the vowels that reminded me of Sable when she spoke to her mom's family in Japan.
Pearl Takashi, this is Merlin Dr. Khorasan Monroe.
The woman looked me up and down, then transferred her gaze to Lorison.
How long do I have her for? Until the problem is resolved or someone else screams louder. Good luck.
He spun on his heel and turned out the door. She pierced me with a hard look.
Don't think because you're a mage or the fabled Khorasan Monroe that I will give you any slack. I aim to be the director by the time I am 50, and I am not letting any prima donna ruin that for me. I will get this negotiation to work, and you will help me. Do you understand?
I quivered for a moment, trying not to say everything at once. I understand that I am here to help you work on an agreement between China, Japan, and the United States. I also understand that I am under no obligation to offer up my personal possessions to my job. She stared at me, then nodded.
Good. You understand how this works. Now, what do you know about Japan?
She turned and moved over to her desk. That they quit trying to kill me a few years ago, and that the royal magician and emperor are not happy with me in the least.
Not helpful, but it's a start. I'm sure Danny Boy made it seem all nice and easy, that Japan has a cancer cure and we want to give them the research Wells did to persuade them to share. And I'm sure he dangled a carrot or two.
I didn't say anything. I just sat down in the only chair. Carelian flopped at my feet, flipping on his "I'm so cute" mode.
Well, here's the stick. I want this agreement. I want China and Japan and the U.S. to enter a long-term medical research open information trade. Mages on both sides have jumped their understanding of viruses and bacteria by at least 100 years. But because of how our draft is structured, we don't have a lot of archmages or Merlins that go into medicine.
I kept my mouth shut. I would have loved to have done that, but was discouraged. Either way, I would be free sooner. Nothing said I couldn't go back and become a doctor.
China is willing to do it for some trade agreements. There are some spices and food that they would like greater access to. Japan, however, is balking. They don't feel we have anything to offer. Their xenophobic tendencies and continuing resentment for the incident during World War II have made them a difficult partner.
I stared at her. By incident, you mean as detonating nuclear bombs on 2 of their cities when mages tried to teleport the uranium out of atomic bombs and ended up pulling the nuclear bombs across the world, activating them, and subsequently destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki? That cautionary tale was why few mages teleported, and why I never carry anything more powerful than a laptop.
Like I said, incidents.
She waved her hand in dismissal.
But they are still interested in the research you now have, no matter what they say.
Pearl moved her mouth in a way that only resembled a smile, if a shark lunging at you resembled a smile.
So, what do I have to do to get you to give it up? You're the newbie here. I can make your life hell and you'll never be able to prove a thing. Worst assignments, late hours, sending you home at rush hour, only to want you back as soon as it is over. I will get this deal, even if I have to drive you crazy to get it.
I blinked. It took a few seconds for everything to process. I looked at Carelian. While he didn't express anything, I could hear his amusement. Then I looked back at Pearl and started laughing. She jerked her head back as if I had slapped her. I didn't fall into full-blown laughter, but more of a giggle.
What?
The demand made me grin. I've had people actively trying to kill me, and I held up. You treating me like shit only guarantees I'll keep it all to myself and actively try to blow the deal, because I have no reason to support it. And you forget, I can play that game just as well. Tires always flat, nylons with a run, tea always cold, food just this side of going bad, batteries that die before important calls. I can do it just as easily, and if not better, because that level of magic costs me almost nothing. I gave her the same smile she'd given me. So, would you like to start again and convince me that working with you will be more rewarding than watching you destroy yourself? Pearl stared at me for a long time. Her eyes narrowed. Then she nodded.
Good. We understand each other. Work with me and I'll help you get out of here sooner. If not, I'll get you transferred someplace else. Maybe Alaska.
I shrugged. I always wanted to see the glaciers. Pearl narrowed her eyes.
I almost admire you. I might actually like you, after we get this agreement.
My nails bit into my palms as I smiled, and tried not to seethe. So much for research and working with anything that interested me.
First, you need to get up to date on the 2 countries and exactly why Japan wants that research. I hope you read fast because you are going to have a lot to read.
Pearl typed like her keyboard was granite and needed to be pulverized. A minute later, a young man with dark hair, an order tattoo, and an earnest smile stuck his head in.
Yes, Mr. Takashi? Take Marilyn Monroe here, help her get her computer set up, log into the various websites, and I sent you the links she needs to download and read.
She shifted her attention to me.
I expect by Wednesday you will be able to see exactly why it is in all our best interests to make nice with Japan. Be here at 10 and we'll talk.
I nodded at her and rose from the chair, following the young man.
After a double take at Carelian, the rest of the day was spent doing the normal things I'd expected. Logins, computer issues, bookmarks, and figuring out where the cafeteria was. By the time I walked out at 6, I was exhausted and felt like my brain might explode. I carried the computer in my hands, stressed about dropping it. I needed to get something to carry it in. I resisted the desire to just get a backpack. Indira would have had a fit if I ruined my look with a backpack. Luckily, there was a number of shops that catered to the office workers of the DC area. It didn't take long before I had a matching set of office luggage. A smart briefcase in burgundy that would hold the laptop, my phone, a notebook, and other basic supplies, but still looked slim and elegant. It matched with a much larger wheeled case that held the briefcase, lunch, my coffee cup, and even extra clothes if I needed to go somewhere after work. I'd seen people, both men and women, toting similar office bags behind them. Once that was accomplished, we walked back to the hotel. En route, I placed an order for dinner so I could eat while I read. Carelian couldn't make up his mind, so for now, he'd live with the dry cat food I'd packed. I spent the walk staring at the people and scenery. Carelian guarded my back, and we were never crowded, no matter how many people were on the street. It had a different vibe from Atlanta, though it was about as humid to my annoyance. We made it to the hotel, and I was rethinking my suit for DC wear, or at least for walking to and from work. I'd have to see about sidestepping more, or changing clothes. Staying in shape had too many benefits to let it go. Dinner arrived about the same time I did, so I grabbed that and headed up.
Are all human workplaces so laced with poison?
Carelian asked after we got back to the room. He'd been rather quiet, and I wondered what was going on in his head. All? No. A certain portion of them, yes. I stripped, getting into comfortable clothes. Then I curled up in the club chair. I had Indian food and reading in as my plan for the night.
Humans are crazy, though I suppose my Malkin would enjoy the games. Why did you not kill that woman?
Carelian, you know I can't just go around killing people. Humans aren't prey. We had discussed this before, but something about a Cath worldview didn't understand anyone permanently in the not prey category.
She threatened you. I thought about biting her.
I'm glad you didn't. It would have caused issues. Though I may need to talk to Georgas and see what is so important about Wells' research, and to think all I wanted was a nice job in a lab or something. The words had just left my mouth when I felt a subtle stab in my brain. I looked over toward the door and sighed as a rip formed. Yes?
I would like to talk to you. Please, come over.
Georgas's voice filled my mind. I glared at Carelian. If I find out you guys are spying on me, or worse, you can read my mind at all times, there will be consequences. I stood, bringing my food with me. My lunch had consisted of an apple. I was hungry.
Reading human minds is confusing and way too much effort.
Carelian dismissed that idea.
Besides, they are boring and full of things that make no sense. Thoughts and words are all that matter. Maybe pictures. It is more likely it is a coincidence. Nothing more.
He stepped through the portal, tail flicking.
Besides, I'd rather hunt for dinner.
I rolled my eyes and stepped through into flames. Chapter 21. Section 2.20.21. Any action done by a familiar in protection of their mage is regarded as an extension of the mage's ability and will be treated as such by the rule of law. Even almost expecting it, I couldn't completely muffle the shriek that slipped past my lips. I reached out on instinct, asking the fire to move away. It did, though sluggishly. I stood there, telling myself that I wasn't burning alive, and continued walking into the space. I'd wondered what a phoenix would consider comfortable for a home realm, but this hadn't been what I thought. The glade, the setup seemed very similar to Baynarl's, was ringed in flames of every shade, from white blue to fierce red to pale orange. But I only felt the warmth of a mild summer day. Trees were randomly scattered through the area, but some were in full summer leaves, others spring blooms, and yet others bare in winter. They all were either fruit or nut trees, and I watched birds and insects flit from one to the other. An arbor of grapevines was where Georgas sat, eating some of the juicy grapes that glimmered from under leaves. He was the size of a large hawk, but the colors made me think more of an exotic parrot. That entrance is a bit startling for a human. Georgas tilted his head, then ruffled out his feathers.
I do apologize. I had forgotten. It has been very long, and James was the last person to visit. He found it amusing, though the first few times he was discomfited. Please, come in. You are free to help yourself to any fruit you may like. I wish to hunt, Georgas. Do I have your permission?
Carelian glanced at the birds, but I didn't think that was what had his nose sniffing the air.
Feel free outside the ring. It is chaos. Do not bring anything through you can't eat. I prefer a quieter life.
Carelian brushed by me, rubbing his cheek on my leg, then dashed through the fire. I held up my dinner, still in its biodegradable cardboard. I'm going to eat, if you don't mind. You caught me about to start my dinner. Georgas flipped a wing at me as he settled down on his perch, tail feathers of blue and red drifting in the faint breeze. I dropped into a cross-legged position and opened up my container. I had chicken tikka masala and naan bread, and I was hungry. Scooping a forkful onto my naan, I took a bite. It wasn't too bad, nothing wonderful, but good enough that I could enjoy it. I needed to eat more, then prod Georgas. He could speak at any time, so I admired the beautiful birds, the odd scenery, and ate.
So, there are more people asking about the research James and I did,
he asked when I was about halfway through my food. People? I said with a snort. Try the government trying to bribe the Japanese. Though I don't know if the royal magician is still involved. I'm not even sure the Japanese suggested it. I took another bite as he eyed me.
Interesting. To be honest, I was surprised Hisahito didn't try to acquire the information over the last few years. He never took well to having his desires thwarted. James found it an admirable trait. I found it a much darker aspect than he. He wants what James discovered badly. Enough to risk my ire. Even manipulate countries to get to it. The infighting between nations has not improved with the OMO meddling.
I took another bite, thinking. I needed to focus on what I could control, and the idea of the Office of Magical Oversight meddling was a can of worms I didn't want to deal with at this moment. What is the big deal about the research? Georgas flapped his wings, looking at me, and I got the feeling I'd surprised him.
You haven't looked at what we found?
Nope. I think there is a letter from Lucille about it, but I haven't bothered to read it yet. Really, it's a few boxes of notes or a bank deposit box. Until today, I didn't think much about it.
I will never understand humans. Technically, it is a large number of notes, but not in a box or bank box. Lucille?
He paused, shifting his wings.
I actively miss her. She was James' friend, lover, and manager for as long as I knew him.
I do not understand you familiars. Yes, James died. That doesn't mean you can't go talk to Lucille. I wouldn't expect Carelian, Esmir, or Bainirl to quit visiting Joe or Sable if I died. They are your friends too, not just me. He gave me a funny look, then ruffled his feathers.
Lucille should have the key to the storage units. What we gathered, researched, and the gifts not kept at the house. James and I traveled the realms often, and he had many friends.
Again he paused and looked at me.
That is not accurate. He had many beings he knew. You have those from realms attending your parties and celebrations.
James had meetings and came here. I do not remember him ever having fun with those from the realms."
A sadness had entered the bird's voice, and I put down my dinner. I'd eaten enough as it was. "He treated you like specimens?" I asked softly. I'd spent enough time in the Albany house to realize that James was fascinated by familiars and the other creatures, the same way I was fascinated by various techniques with medical experiments. But I'd never gotten the idea he thought of them as friends, or even equals. Me? I'd never had any doubt Carelian was a person.
"Maybe that is it. He asked my opinion, but—"
Georgas railed off and began to viciously preen one of his feathers.
"You've caused me to doubt my relationship with him. I had thought he was a friend. But maybe I was wrong."
The old joke Carelian and I had came back to me, and I smiled at the phoenix. "Maybe you were thinking about it wrong. It isn't that he thought of you as a pet, but more he was your pet, and who pays much attention to what their pet really thinks?" I kept my voice gentle and light, as I am very sure Carelian thinks of me and my partners as his queens, more than we ever think of him as anything other than our friend. Georgas pulled his head up and looked at me, then began to trill. The sound mixed with the fire to create a chorus of bright, cheerful notes that forced me to smile.
"Perhaps you are right. He was my pet, and at times a bit dense. That brings us back to the research. It has much that is fluff, or is about Bob, and will be of little use to anyone. But there are items locked away that would be of great danger should people get their hands on them."
Now I'm curious. Why was James able to get this information?
"Me."
His voice was flat, with little pride or satisfaction in it. I made an inquiring noise, and he turned around on his perch, letting me see his back.
"Usually, only lords can travel to different realms, but phoenixes are unusual in that we have access to all realms, with or without a tear. James realized that, and convinced me that humans learning about the other realms was in all of our best interest. I am no longer sure."
"Ah," I nodded. "I'm sorry. Humans are complicated and arrogant, though I still think Kath have us beat." I teased. Georgas laughed, then trill again.
"Kath are superior. At least they think so. Did you know that Salastra attended your joining?"
That brought me up short, and I stared at him. I specifically looked for her and had not seen her. Tursane said she decided not to come. I didn't think Tursane had lied to me. It was possible, but why?
"She wasn't going to, then changed her mind. She watched as a hummingbird. I'm not sure anyone knew she was there, but I could see her. Birds of all types cannot hide from me."
I shuddered at the idea of that much power in a tiny body, not to mention how she did it, but there were some things that were better left unknown. So what about the research? I wasn't going to, but there is a lot of pressure on this. While no one can order me, it would make my life much easier. What is in there that they can't know about? Georgas turned around to face me, shifting from one clawed foot to another.
"Being a familiar means you are bonded to that person. It clouds your judgment. You want what your mage wants, to the point of ignoring wisdom. Kath are more resistant to that urge. Not that you have an overweening ego. I made errors in judgment that now, after my ashing, I see I should have never agreed to."
He picked a berry off a branch near him, and I tried to not get my stomach twisted in knots.
"One of the things in the notes is the secret to calling."
He broke off as an unearthly yowl filled the air, causing me to leap to my feet. "Carelian?" I said, turning to look for him. I hadn't paid that much attention when he left.
"Oh, what has that Kath done?"
Georgas muttered. His wings spread wide, and he looked much more like a falcon than a peacock. Another howl as Carelian burst through the fire, panting with a set of slices along his ribs.
"We might have incoming,"
he muttered, turning to look at the flames still flickering away. His ears were laid almost flat along his skull, whiskers sleeked back, and his mouth hung open in a snarl. "Carelian, are you okay?" I rushed over, dropping to my knees to inspect his side. 4 parallel gashes raked from his right shoulder to his back flank. They bled sluggishly, exposing muscle, but no bone or tendons.
"It will heal. I think it is coming. Kath, I told you to not bring back anything you couldn't eat."
The bird sounded annoyed as he flapped and launched himself into the air, hovering above me.
"I didn't bring it back. It thought I was dinner. I am no one's prey."
Carelian hissed, tail cracking like a whip. "You hit me with that and you're getting kibble for a month," I warned. He left welts. He hissed at me, and I pulled back, surprised. I couldn't remember him ever hissing at me and meaning it.
"Get ready. It's coming."
"What in the world did you piss off?" I asked as I stood. The desire to tape up his side warred with getting ready to fight whatever was coming.
"Yes, Kath. What did you annoy?"
Georgaz sounded just as annoyed as me, but Carelian didn't bother to look at the bird. Instead, he hunkered down, gaze still locked on the ring of fire. I shot a worried look at Georgaz, who flapped lazily in the glade, which I swore had warmed up by a degree or 2.
"I annoyed no one. Something thought I was a good lunch. I disagreed vehemently."
Carelian spat, anger in his voice, and if I hadn't been borderline terrified, I might have laughed. His ego was very persnickety. A roar sounded through the clearing, scaring the birds, and I snapped to attention. Earth shield ready, and I learned a few new tricks to keep people in place. Quicksand could be formed quickly, or mud. It amounted to the same thing. The flames flickered, and a form charged into the glade, skidding to a halt about 10 yards from us. It had the body and head of a lion, but there were 2 huge, leathery wings beating a draft of fire and dust from the torn-up ground. Instead of a tail with a tuft on the end, there was a scorpion stinger raised up in the sky with a point that looked like it could go through my body. It also had a set of lines going down one side of its face and rents in one wing that matched. The facial ones were bleeding, while the skin on the wings just hung there, useless. On reflex, I snapped up an earth shield between us and it, pulled electricity to me, and turned to glare at Carelian. "You dragged a manticore here? A Merlin-blasted manticore?" I really didn't know if I wanted to strangle my familiar or just jump back to the nice, sane Earth realm where all I had to worry about was a conniving government and random serial killers. Chapter 22. Section 95.1. The Office of Magical Oversight will manage and maintain the Mage database and keep secure all information therein. The U.S. government will accept their jurisdiction and tests as binding when it comes to Mage ranking and management. I braced myself, ready to fight for my life, as it roared again. This time I could hear the pain in the sound.
"Mikal, what have I told you about playing with others and not telling them?"
Georgaz's voice cut through the clearing, and I jerked my head up to look at him.
"Not everyone is so understanding of surprise play."
The manticore's wings drooped, and it hung its head.
"Sorry, he was pouncing a rabbit, so I pounced him."
There was excitement and sheepishness in that voice.
"Pouncing is a game, but he hurts me."
I swear it sounded like he was about to start crying. Now Carelian turned his head to look at Georgaz.
"I did say not to bring back trouble."
Georgaz sighed, a level of exasperation in his voice.
"Corey, Carelian, this is Mikal, a manticore. He is the equivalent of your 3 or 4-year-old.
The manticore sank down on his haunches and looked mournfully at his torn wing, and then rubbed his paw gingerly across his face. His mane was a darker brown than his coat, which looked tan. The scorpion tail throbbed a dangerous red at the end, and I couldn't help but swallow at the idea of it slamming into anyone.
"It hurts,"
he said, pain and sadness in his voice.
"Yes, I suppose it does. Carelian, you caused the damage. You fix it. This is not my fault. I had a 300-pound creature pounce me. I retaliated."
Carelian's tone was flat, eyes narrowed as he stared at Jorgas.
"And I did not say that his wounds were not earned. I am telling you to repair the damage you caused."
Jorgas flew over to Mikal.
"And you will remember this as a reason to not pounce, because you are bored and want someone to play with."
Until that minute, I had not known that lion faces could pout, but the pout on Mikal's face was enough to make a harder heart than mine melt. "Please, Carelian, I believe he has learned his lesson," I asked, unable to hold any anger at what was obviously a cub. "I believe you caused more than a bit of damage when you were younger." I referred to the tuna can incident that we still teased him about. Carelian hissed, his tail still lashing, but he relaxed his body and stretched.
"That was to inanimate objects. Fine, but even you would have fled if that had attacked you."
"Absolutely," I agreed, and I probably would have been screaming in terror the entire time. I reached down to pet him. "Your actions were smart." His ears flicked up, and he sighed, walking over to the pouting creature.
"You attacked well. I did not hear you. It was a good attack, though making sure your prey can't fight back is wise. Let me see your wing."
I watched, fascinated. I'd never seen Carelian actively use magic besides opening rips between the planes. Carelian sat next to Mikal, looking small in comparison to the manticore. His tail went up and drew a line backward from the edge of the tear to where it would have started. I knew he was chaos-aligned, but we never talked about branches to know what magic he had or how he used it, mostly because every time I brought up the subject he fell asleep or pretended to. Where his tail rested glowed, and I could see tissue rebonding, reforming there as he pulled his tail up. He did it again and again until the wing was whole, though pink and shiny.
"Don't use it or stress it for a few days. The skin is still tender and will tear easy."
Carelian's voice was firm and a bit annoyed.
"Close your wing, Mikal, and keep it closed until I tell you."
"Yes, Jorgas,"
the manticore muttered, folding both wings tightly against his back. Carelian repeated the process with the wounds on his face. I could see Carelian was exhausted, but he didn't stop until all wounds were healed.
"No roaring for 3 sleeps,"
he growled, stalking back to me.
"We done? I would like salmon. I'm starving, as someone interrupted my dinner plans."
"How did you do that? Why didn't you talk about your magic? And now that I think about it, why didn't you heal me after you bit me?" I couldn't figure out if I just wanted answers or if I was offended that he hadn't healed me. He threw himself at my feet, eyes closed.
"Because, and I did heal you. Did you not notice it disappeared by the time you went to the noisy city, and there are no scars?"
My mouth opened. Then I stopped and looked at my arm. He was right. I couldn't even find the marks. It had stopped bleeding later that night, and I'd taken off the bandage, not thinking much about it. "Oh," I said, feeling my face burn. Some days I really was an idiot. Swallowing, I turned to Jorgas, who had escorted Mikal out and was soaring back to his perch. "I should probably get going, but you were saying what was in the research?" Jorgas landed and shook his body a few times, making sure all the feathers were laying correctly.
"Yes, there are many things in there, though we never stumbled upon the death of mages causing rips and encouraging emergencies. But
There are things in there that would be best kept out of Hisahito's hand. I do not believe he would use it responsibly, but perhaps I'm wrong."
"And that would be?" I had no idea what they could have found. Jorgas sighed.
"There is a way to make a permanent, stable passage to a pocket realm."
I blinked at him and processed what he said. I even saw Carelian lift his head, ears flickering.
"Does my Malkin or Tursane know?"
Carelian asked, his voice tight.
"No one does, I believe, besides you two. We realized what it meant and buried the information, but I think James mentioned our discovery, or the possibility of the stable portal to Hisahito. A stable connection that you could harvest resources from would be of incalculable value. Whichever country had it would reap riches, but it would also allow any realm denizens, both sentient and not, into your world."
Jorgas looked oddly embarrassed, if a bird could manage to be embarrassed.
"Right now, only mages can create rips, and only lords, or those like Tursane or Salstra, can step back and forth. Foci can always go home and to their mage, but the door closes soon after they step through. This would create a permanent passage to a pocket realm that stays there until undone by the mage."
I stood there as that revelation filtered into my brain. "That is bad. Very bad," I said finally, as my mind took all our worst ecological disasters and multiplied them with magic involved.
"Hence my worry."
Jorgas preened vigorously, not looking at me. I wanted to groan. I need to go through that data, though at this point I'm almost tempted to just destroy all of it and say it was lost. It might be safer than that information ever getting out.
"It is your property. You have to decide."
Jorgas's voice was not sympathetic. I glared at him. "That is not helpful. I'm getting pressure from my bosses, the government, and probably other people I haven't even met yet to hand over the data. And you tell me if I do, it could create the biggest land grab in history? Thank you so very much," I said, my voice dripping sarcasm. But internally, I was trying to stop the freak out as every bad thing I could think of cycled through my brain.
"And that is why you are an excellent inheritor for James. You understand the consequences to what his research means. But that is just the one I am the most worried about. We discovered many things. There may be others that are just as incendiary. Things that mages, countries could twist to harm many."
If a phoenix could smirk, he was, as he imparted that last bit of wisdom.
"I'm still hungry. Shall we go, or do I need to leave and find my own sustenance without someone pouncing me?"
I had never realized pounce could be used as a swear word. "Yes." I turned to Jorgas. "I may have questions later, but I will try to look at the information this weekend, and I won't make any promises until after I've seen the research." Jorgas ruffled his feathers.
"And that is why I knew you would be a better choice than Hisahito. Be well, Corazon Monroe."
I nodded goodbye, and we stepped back to the hotel room. I tossed my food container and placed an order of salmon for Carelian. There were a few places that would deliver raw fish specifically for the familiars. Capitalism had major advantages. I nibbled on one of the pieces of naan I hadn't taken with me as I thought. My desires went from one extreme to another as I contemplated the situation. Information. I needed more information. I'm going to try to read the material I was provided, see if I can figure out what is behind this, besides just imperialistic tendencies. Carelian lay in the middle of the hotel room floor, looking exhausted.
"Smart. I just want food, and then to sleep. That level of healing is not my normal energy output."
I frowned, worried. "Are you okay?" I stared at him, worried about the scratches on his shoulder. "Do you need me to look at your wounds?"
"I'm fine. I healed them too. Exhausted. That is draining." He closed his eyes, even his tail laying still. I let him be, and read until there was a knock on the door. Carelian woke up enough to inhale his salmon, then he jumped up on the small couch and was asleep minutes later, sprawled across the length of it. Japan was interesting. One of the more standoffish countries, the other being the American Indians, and the nuclear bombs and magic had strengthened their xenophobic tendencies. Was the medical research they had that important? And no matter how I looked, I couldn't figure out why China was so interested as well. The treaty that was being proposed would give both the US and China access to this research, though there were other trade agreements and a host of other clauses in them as well. It read like a wish list from politicians, but I knew something else was going on. Countries didn't try this hard for the boring stuff. I closed the laptop, rubbing my temples. A headache was forming with all the manipulation going on. Being a paramedic would have been so much easier. My eyes fell on Carelian, who was still snoring away, and my joining ring. But if I wasn't who I was, I wouldn't have all of this. It was worth a headache or two. Bed called, and I gave in. Tomorrow would be interesting, with more going on. Or maybe, if I was lucky, I'd be horribly bored.
Chapter 23. Section 1.140.3. All mages from other countries must be declared, and their tattoos must be clearly visible. All delegates to the United States, excepting the American Indian Nation, must have standard tattoos and present themselves as such. I walked in the next morning at 7:30. I figured if I got in early, maybe I'd have time to get my cube set up and get a better handle on the lay of the land, and figure out where Carelian could sleep and not get stepped on non-stop. He was still tired, but still followed me in, watching everything. Pearl stuck her head out of her office as I walked by with my laptop. "Huh, you might have a chance yet. How far did you get on your reading material?" Protesting that she said she would ask tomorrow would do me no good. I skimmed most of it. While the history of Japan was interesting, the players involved don't make sense. And China pushing for this so strongly and making sure we are involved makes even less sense. But I was going to look at other treaties today and see if there was a common factor. I took a drink of my coffee and hoped I could figure out where to get more. She tilted her head at me. "Not bad. Keep at it. Maybe you might have some value." Then she yanked her head back inside her office and shut the door. I gave the door a wary eye and continued my assigned cubicle. The question of should I be annoyed or relieved that I was being treated like an intern niggled at me. Either way, it didn't matter. I logged in and then went back to my research. If nothing else, I was learning things and was always interested. I found more coffee, decent but not good, and then went back to reading. Every link I clicked took me to more rabbit warrens, and I felt like I'd never be able to figure it all out. A door opened, and I heard Pearl snap out my name. "Monroe." I pulled my head out of cultural aspects of Japan and stood, glancing at the clock on the computer. It was already after 10. Pearl was in her doorway and nodded when I got my head high enough for her to see. "Yes?" "Get your stuff. Be prepared to listen. We have a meeting with Japan and China's representatives in 10 minutes. She stepped back into her office as soon as the words escaped her lips. "Okay," I muttered as I sat down and tried to get my stuff. Not that I knew for sure what I would need. I spent a few moments debating what I should take. Finally, I decided I needed to look assured and confident, because that was almost never a bad option. I grabbed my new briefcase and slipped the computer in with the notebook I'd started with questions to myself. Double-checking that my badge was clipped to my jacket, I walked over to Pearl's office. All of my clothes were pantsuits. I really didn't like dresses. This meant I was dressed in black jean slacks, a silk shell top in dark green, and a simple Chanel-style jacket in black and silver plaid. It had interior pockets and didn't bind. I looked nice and not too extravagant. "You coming?" I asked Carelian, who had spent the morning under my desk working over his fur. He'd slept solidly all night as far as I could tell.
Yes, I am curious about how the prey will react to you.
He rose and yawned, displaying all his teeth. They aren't prey, they are liaisons and my coworkers. I said that mentally, not wanting anyone to overhear. The office had filled up while I worked.
Prey, they should bow before my queen, and you will prove your worth.
I snorted. His perception of the world around us sometimes made me laugh. The rest of the time, I was glad he didn't truly decide humans would be acceptable dinners, though I wondered if that was just because he liked salmon better. "I'm ready," I said from the door of her office. Pearl looked up and nodded. "Good." She stood up and pulled on a suit jacket of stark white that matched her slacks over her blue blouse, and I frowned a bit. "What?" Not to be rude, ma'am, but I'm pretty sure both Japan and China regard white as the color of death and purity. Blue meant different things in both cultures, but the fact that in America we rarely wore white outside of weddings or blouses made it a statement. "You have been doing the readings. Excellent. And good. I want them to know it is death to cross me, and I will gladly wear it to their funeral." I fought back a snicker. "Very well." She paused at the doorway, gazing at Carelian. "I take he is coming?" I just nodded. "Tell him not to shed on my suit. Red means something very different."
Why does everyone think I can control shedding? Besides, you should be honored I would grace you with my DNA.
I could tell he was talking only to me, so I just rolled my eyes and hurried after her. For all her dumpling-like attributes, the woman walked fast. I followed her down the hallway to another bank of elevators, down, out of the building, into another building up to another floor, then down a hallway with nothing but closed doors. "We are here. It is just the two of us. China decided to demand a last-second meeting, and the other person, Scott Yang, assigned to this negotiation had to take today off. You don't speak Mandarin or Japanese, do you?" I shook my head. "No, I don't, but..." Before I could say more, she waved a hand at me. "It doesn't matter. We conduct everything in English to make sure the language is the same, but being able to hear their comments makes life easier. I can speak Mandarin and Cantonese. Scott speaks Japanese, but the diplomat from China normally speaks to his aides in Minnan, and while I can get words, I lose much of it." She shrugged. "Take notes and see if you can dangle the carrot of your research to get this treaty. That is still mine, and I'm not playing any games with it at this point. Besides, I think you will be surprised at how they react to me. Though I'm really hoping they don't try to kill me. I'm sure you are overreacting, and why would two flunkies in the Japanese political machine recognize you? They are like us and employ thousands." Pearl dismissed my concerns as she walked into the conference room. I followed, keeping my face impassive as I pulled out the laptop. A quick search on Japanese and Chinese customs helped a little bit. At least I now knew not to shake hands, just bow and smile with closed lips. Before I could figure out much more than that, the door opened and a staffer escorted in a man and a woman. I stood up as Pearl did, and they halted a few steps in. Their eyes scanned both of us, then they bowed slightly.
"Mrs. Takashi, Mr. Yang is not here today."
"No, Mr. Yomogoshi, we had a prior commitment today. Marlon Monroe, this is Special Dignitary Shiro Yamagoshi and his assistant, Han Tamagio. This is Merlin Corson Monroe. She will be working with us and helping to seal the deal." Both of them stiffened and stared at me for a long moment. They turned their bodies so they weren't even looking at me.
"Mrs. Takashi, we look forward to Mr. Yang returning. Where shall we start today?"
Pearl frowned, glancing at me. I stood there, hands clasped in front of me, not doing anything. "The liaison from China should be here shortly. Merlin Monroe would..." Mr. Yamagoshi cut her off.
"Thank you. We will take our seats and await their arrival. We should start with trade incentives and then go to what China will offer."
They nodded to her and took a seat as far from me as they could. I had sat at one end with my back against the wall, while Pearl had taken the head of the table to my left, as a matter of course. They sat and started talking between themselves, Carelian whispered in my head.
They are talking about the dishonor of having the Forbidden One here. They almost walked out.
I fought with the idea of telling Pearl, but decided at this point letting her know Carelian could speak their language, and how bad a miscalculation this was would better serve me by keeping it under my hat. Before Pearl could say anything, the door opened again, and 2 more people walked in. Where the 2 from Japan were lean and fit, this man was rotund, if not obese. He made Pearl seem curvy in comparison. He was followed by a young man whose face was covered by his hair as he constantly looked down.
Mrs. Takashi, have arrived. Let us begin the negotiations as China needs this to further our country's climate of feudalism.
His voice was hard and flat, and a bit high. Nothing like the jolly voice I had expected from a rotund man.
Chen Wen, this is Marilyn Monroe. She will be working with us to ensure an agreement is reached.
He looked at me and sniffed, then took a seat at the table in the middle. The young man who had not yet been introduced scurried over and set up a computer and laid documents and a pen in front of Chun, like a waiter setting the table. Chun murmured to his assistant, who nodded.
He asked if the leverage was in place and if there was any change in existing plans. Freedom should pay their debts as they have accepted the money all these years.
I made a note of that while I pretended to pay attention to stuff on my computer. Pearl cleared her throat.
The meeting tomorrow with the ambassadors is set up, but we need to finish laying out what the terms of the agreement are. Currently, while the biological research called NASO is still the primary goal, there are also trade and the open research agreement we are pursuing. The U.S. is willing to offer open information trade with government medical research, as well as copies of the research James Wells did.
The government doesn't own that, and it is not up for trade at this time. I snapped out the words as I matched the glare Pearl sent to me. Dragons don't let anyone browbeat them. She ground her teeth and looked at both sets of people.
Is there anything else that can be offered in addition? The spices and technology bans towards China will be altered and lifted.
She paused to slide a piece of paper toward Chun.
And we agreed to increase our purchases of tea and rice from China by 3%.
I tried not to fume, but I wanted to strangle her.
That sounds good, but 5% would sound better. The open sharing of medical research between the 3 of us would be good for the health of all involved.
He smiled, and my truth sense pinged hard. I blinked. My truth sense stayed at low levels, and I usually tuned it all out, not caring about the lies people told each other all day long. The people in my life rarely lied to me, and if they did, like about my cooking, it was because they loved me. This was a red alert, and I jerked my head up, looking at him. I was the only mage in the room, and maybe he didn't realize. With a quick jerk, I tucked my head down and started to pay much more attention to the conversation.
I would need to check with the White House, but I don't believe a 5% increase is out of consideration. But only if China drops the tariff on.
Pearl kept on arguing details, and I focused on Chun. Most of his words weren't lies, but they weren't everything. I'd never focused much on truth sensing. I could use it as I'd proved in New York, but in the last few years I rarely bothered. It got so annoying you just tuned it out. Now, I didn't. He only lied about how he was sure it would help all 3 countries. That didn't surprise me. This was politics after all. But why had the specific phrase, the health of all involved, been so strong of a lie?
Marilyn Monroe?
I jerked my head up at Pearl's words, annoyed she'd called attention to me. Right now, my fading into the background was much better.
Please help our Japanese liaison with the wording of...
Pearl was cut off, and from the way her eyes widened, I assumed it was either so rude it shocked her, doubtful, or so unexpected she didn't know how to react.
We have no need of assistance. We will need to communicate with our emperor as to which way you would like to proceed. We are asking for the removal of all remaining sanctions, the agreed-upon medical research sharing, and tariff removal for all exports.
Mr. Yamagoshi stated this in a flat voice, never once looking my direction. For all the attention they paid to me, you would have thought I was a piece of furniture. I let everyone go back and forth for about 2 hours. Not once did any of them address me, and Pearl gave up, just shooting me notes on the internal messaging system. At 4 p.m., and my stomach was growling, both envoys stood.
That is enough for today. We will return on Thursday. I expect Mr. Yang to be here.
It wasn't a question from the Japanese. Chun nodded and smiled. The young man with him, who still had his face covered, rose and followed him out. We both stood there. Then Pearl turned to me, her voice cool.
What was that all about?
I sat back down and gathered up my stuff. I warned you that Japan would not interact with me, and I will not, I growled out that word, staring at her, give up my personal possessions. There's nothing here that is worth it to me, unless you want to knock 5 years off my draft. Pearl stared at me and sat back down, her eyes not moving from me. I ignored her and packed everything up. I was starving and needed to go to the bathroom.
Why couldn't you be a pushover and scared of offending authorities?
I smirked as I looked up at her. Because you aren't that scary. Trust me. So I'm not going to fold. What is the next move? Oh, and if you care, Chun is lying about wanting this to benefit everyone. She waved her hand, dismissing that as she started to pack up.
I expect every word out of their mouths to be a lie. It is the nature of diplomacy.
Silence fell between us, and I felt Carelian move under the table.
I need this. We need this. Both for my career and for the country. If the research on this new virus plays out the way we hope, it could revolutionize the way we deal with any type of cancer. It will let us target specific cells in the body without the need for radiation or chemotherapy. We need this.
There was something dark and personal in her tone, but she straightened and kept talking.
I can't order you to turn over the information that Wells left you, but I can entreat you. For your fellow Americans, we need this.
I didn't say anything else. She hadn't lied, but there was something else in her tone. Neither of us spoke another word. She left, and I looked down at Carelian. Well?
This should be fun, though it is a boring way to chase prey.
He didn't say anything else on the subject, instead prodding me to leave and get food. He wanted beef. That sounded good to me. Chapter 24. Section 1.141.5. All government employees must follow their department rules in dealing with foreign mages. Culture clashes are not allowed. Mages must be clearly identified and may not actively use magic on mages from other countries under most conditions. The next day was spent with my mind in the world of treaties. I focused on the details of treaties with Japan and China. There were so many, all with multiple layers that made no sense and sometimes actively contradicted each other. I had no idea how people did this day after day. It was boring, confusing, and frustrating all at the same time. Carelian spent most of his time sleeping, but I'd already promised him a long hike this weekend. There was a place we could step to and head out over the Appalachian Trail. He enjoyed catching the occasional snack, but mostly just chasing things for entertainment. After I settled down, we'd have to talk, because he'd go crazy coming to work with me all the time. But for now, he said he needed to be here. Thursday morning, I walked into the office, already feeling the boredom and drudgery weighing at me. If they made the offer good enough, I might turn over James' research just to end this hell faster. If we hiked on Saturday, I could go over it on Sunday. I was pretty sure Lucille could get the information and the keys to the house for me. A man I didn't know waited at my cubicle. When I got close enough, he snapped out at me.
"There is a meeting at 6 p.m.
His voice had the odd flatness of someone who had learned English via listening to computers.
"Be ready to stay late. Negotiators in China are getting up early to meet with us. They will have the authority to talk through some of the issues with the current line items.
Japan will not be there." I looked at him. He was at least 3 inches taller than me, and half smiled. "Hi, you are?" He huffed at me, and I narrowed my eyes, waiting for his response. "Scott Yang. I am the lead with Pearl on this treaty. I heard you have already pissed off the Japanese. The two of us are going to focus on China and see if we can nail down their aspect. Then, if we get into the meetings with Japan, we will see what happens. If nothing else, we can use you to rattle them and piss them off. Might be worth a try." He stared at me the entire time, and I fought not to hunch my shoulders. "That might work. You may need to have someone check into how mad the Emperor still is at me, but I'll be ready." Scott nodded at me and turned, leaving without another word. I sighed and glanced down at my footrest. "Feel like going to get some dinner later before the meeting? You don't need to come to the meeting, you know. It will be all boring and lots of talk."
"My queen, I stay. Though food and a walk would be good."
I worked through lunch, occupied with research, and trying to prepare for Chinese rage. At 4, we wandered out, ignoring the double takes that Carelian got, and the occasional shriek of surprise. I didn't care about taking a longer lunch. I needed food, and so did he, so I figured we'd be there rather late. At 5:30, I walked through the cubicles until I found where Scott was. He had gathered his equipment together in a slightly heftier briefcase than I had. "What?" he asked, not looking up at me as he finished. "I don't know where we are meeting." "The room number was in the invite." He stood and pivoted, staring at me, the look not unfriendly, but definitely not welcoming. "And this is day 4, which means I have no idea what that means. My orientation has consisted of threats, browbeating, innuendos, and showing me where the coffee and bathrooms are." I stared back at him. The coffee part had been non-negotiable. "Valid. Follow me." He turned and headed out, going the same direction Pearl had gone on Tuesday.
"Do none of these people have lives or personality?"
I shrugged helplessly at Carelian and followed Scott. He walked like a man on a mission, and I felt myself getting out of breath trying to keep up with him. I needed to get back to working out and more weekend hiking. Never enough time, I swear. He stopped after an elevator ride and weaving through multiple mazes, ensuring I was truly lost. "The meeting is in that room with the double doors. Video conferencing is set up. I am going to use the facilities prior to the meeting. I advise you do the same." Without waiting for a response, he spun on his heels and headed toward the door marked Men. "I'm starting to think they don't have personalities," I muttered to Carelian. I headed toward the double doors, Carelian pacing by my side.
"Stop,"
he whispered in my mind, and I came to an immediate halt. I glanced at him and waited.
"The Chinese are discussing something called Project Devastate, that they suspect it will take 3 more generations of concerted effort to see a significant change. A comment about still seeking data on what causes emergence."
He looked up at me, ears back.
"I am unsure what they mean, but I do not believe it is for our benefit."
I shrugged and headed toward the door. There wasn't any way to answer that. I pushed it open, and Chun and his assistant were seated at one of the tables. Another table sat parallel to them with a large TV screen on the wall between us. The layout of the room reminded me of an equal sign with a square at the end. They nodded to me, their bodies hesitating a brief moment as Carelian followed me in. I returned their nods and took a seat at the end of the other table. At the earlier meeting, Carelian had been under the table before they arrived and didn't move until after they left, so he must have surprised them. "Any chance they know about your ability to translate?"
"Doubtful. The number of mages with familiars is small, and many would never need that ability. You, however, are a powerful queen and will need all of my skills."
"Hi," I said brightly, smiling at them. They nodded and whispered in rapid Chinese, or Cantonese, or whatever language it was Pearl said he normally spoke in.
"I am not translating that. It would defeat the purpose of not knowing the language."
I kept the soft smile on my face and nodded at them and set up my belongings. At some point, I'm going to ask you what they said.
You really don't want to know. It was extremely rude, and if I suspected they meant what they said, I might have practiced my skinning skills on them.
His voice had a hard edge to it in my mind. Maybe I didn't want to know what they had said. Scott Yang came bustling in and spoke to Chun in a rapid fire of syllables, though it sounded vaguely different than what Chun had been using. What language is he speaking? I asked Carelian, keeping my head down and trying to look unimportant.
No idea.
I resisted the desire to stare at him. Instead, I acted like my computer was the most interesting thing in the world. How in the world can you translate if you don't know what language they are speaking?
It doesn't work like that. I can hear what they mean, but the intent.
He paused for a second, and I tried to be patient.
There are meanings behind words being spoken. I cannot translate a TV show because the people are not here. Phones are very difficult because I can't sense the speaker. Are we done?
I fought not to giggle. Carelian hated trying to explain how his magic worked. Esmir, on the other hand, loved it. But to a certain level, for most denizens, it came down to instinct. Bainyarl was one of the few that could explain it logically, in a manner my Earth-oriented self could make sense of. Before I could ask him anything else, Scott stopped speaking in whatever language he had been and nodded.
Mr. Wren,
he said, his voice formal. Chun nodded back at him, sitting up as straight as his impressive belly would allow. Scott went to a tablet attached to the wall beneath the screen and typed for a minute. The screen flickered and lit up.
Your colleagues will be on shortly,
he said to Chun. Scott came over and took a seat at the same table as me, but much closer to the screen. He sat up as the video started to connect. The screen flickered and revealed a room that didn't look all that different from the one we were in. One big table with doors behind it, and the walls were trimmed in red, but otherwise it could have been anywhere. 2 men were sitting at the table and nodded when the screen resolved.
Ni hao,
the older one said. He was dressed in a severe black suit, with a rather upscale parted haircut, while the man next to him had the more typical straight cut.
Ni hao,
Scott replied.
Zulun, I am ready to hear your request. Mrs. Takashi gave me some details that Mr. Wen requested earlier. I believe we should verify if they are correct.
The man on the other end, who I assumed was Zulun, nodded.
Yes. While I have ultimate faith in Wen, the Emperor and the Minister of Trade have clarified some of his requests.
He spoke excellent unaccented English, and I wondered if he'd been educated here.
Then I am ready to review your details. Are we ready to work on the items at hand? Item 1 is the request to increase exports by 3%.
Scott's voice was the same monotone, and I glanced at him. Pretty sure Pearl would have recorded the request to increase to 5%.
I am afraid your notes aren't accurate,
Chun said, his voice almost bubbly.
We are looking for a 5% increase.
I apologize, but after much discussion with the Son of Heaven, we believe a 10% increase is more sustainable.
Zoo's voice was smooth, but I couldn't sense this was as much a game as haggling, something I had never been good at. I sat back and took notes, sensing when they got to the real numbers, 6% increase in soya beans and 3% in gold from the United States. They had moved on to the next area, the ability to share data with the government medical research centers, primarily Johns Hopkins and Walter Reed. This part at least interested me, as I had no idea what research was being performed in either center. I would have loved to have been placed there to work, playing with bacteria or working with other diseases. Even using my magic to manipulate growth in new ways would have been fascinating. I looked up at the screen to the other side of the world as the double doors opened, and an old man strode in, followed by 3 guards. He had long white hair caught back in a tail, and I could see the multiple tattoos on his face indicating he was a Merlin, though I had no way of making them out. He wore robes of gold in a style I hadn't expected to see outside the movies. But I didn't need the immediate bowing or clothes to realize this was the Emperor.
The dragon following behind him proved that. Pictures of the Dragon of China were omnipresent when you searched the internet for information about China. It had been the same familiar since 1861. The Emperor Tongji of Qin Dynasty emerged as a Merlin, and the dragon appeared, stating he was the familiar of Zaichun, the emperor's birth name. The succession ceremony had taken place in the imperial ancestral temple courtyard. There was no hiding either the emergence or the dragon, as it was one of the few times the dragon had spoken to others. Thousands had come to watch the coronation, and it spread through the city like wildfire. I had made a quick attempt to research the dragon, an online search or two. It never was referred to as anything except the Dragon of China. It was the poster child of every Eastern dragon I'd ever seen. A ruffle around its neck in yellow, scales of red that darkened to black by its tail, with 4 legs and no wings, and a lion-like face but with a muzzle that was too long. He was gorgeous and intimidating at the same time.
Emperor Qisheng, how may we assist you?
Scott had risen and bowed. I mimicked him, but I was focused more on the dragon. He was supposed to be spirit. Part of me wondered if he'd like to come over to the parties we had in Albany.
I wanted to check in and lay eyes on the Merlin that has caused so much distress for Japan.
He didn't sound at all upset about that. There was the slightest smirk on his face as he focused on me, and I got the feeling he was just as deadly as the Emperor of Japan, just in a different way. Even over the video conference, I knew this man wouldn't hesitate to order someone killed if it furthered his purpose. I flailed for something to say that wasn't snark or rude. It is nice to meet you. Would you introduce your familiar? I hated trying to figure out names. The room went silent on both sides of the planet. What was the issue? Chun Wen hissed at me.
The Dragon of China never speaks with lower mortals. He is a sign that the gods are pleased with us. The only way to address him is not at all. Only the Emperor and his family may address him.
I blinked, pulling back a little. That sounds awfully boring and even cruel. My words deepened the silence as everyone stared at me, and the Emperor wasn't even smiling a little.
Humans are idiots.
Carelian's voice wafted through my mind, but I didn't dare turn to look at him, trying to figure out what he meant. A spike of pain, so fast it only registered because the image on the screen showed Carelian walking toward the dragon. Oh shit, I muttered as people in both time zones gasped in horror. Chapter 25. Section 1.125.3. All declarations of need must be filed both with the draft board and the OMO for auditing purposes.
Call your cat back!
Scott didn't yell at me, but the words were shot out of his mouth with enough force to bring spittle. I don't own him. I barely looked at Scott, instead watching the guards who had grabbed their ruler and had him in a corner of the room, 2 of them in front of him with guns drawn, while the aides were flat on the ground, with their hands laced behind their heads. I assumed this was to show they weren't threats, and I couldn't blame them as the 3rd guard was brandishing the gun and yelling in Japanese at Carelian. Carelian, for his part, was sitting upright in front of the dragon, and I figured they were talking. It was a similar pose to how Arachina and Carelian often conversed. The guard was still yelling in Chinese and getting closer to Carelian and the dragon, gun waving, and I could see other people approaching through the open double doors.
You had better not shoot my familiar,
I warned as I scanned the room looking for specific details. If things went wrong, I'd sidestep there and get 2 countries declaring me anathema. But there was no way I'd let Carelian get hurt.
Merlin Monroe,
Scott snarled. Everyone on our side was standing and switching between glaring at me and at the screen as the guard waved the gun. The men on the floor looked like they were trying to become one, while the Emperor peered over the shoulder of his guards. The only sounds were the guard and his rapid-fire commands, though I had no idea what they were saying. The dragon turned and roared at the guard, and everything went silent. A low voice spoke, and everyone in the room pivoted to look at the Emperor. I shot Scott a quick look, having no idea what had been said. He looked even more pale than he had a minute ago.
He said to stand down. This is a friend of the Dragon of China.
He swallowed and stared at the screen. The Emperor kept talking, and eyes were getting wider. Then the dragon and Carelian disappeared. Scott cleared his throat.
He said the Dragon of China was going to visit a friend and would be back when everyone quit acting like...
Scott cleared his throat, and I looked at the Emperor, who had rage written on his face.
Like idiots.
Oh. Before I could say anything more, Carelian's voice whispered in my head.
Tia Teng and I are in Albany. He needed a break. I might raid the Kens, and Malkin is coming to say hi. I'll explain later.
Be careful, and try not to terrify anyone. I wasn't too worried. The clearing at my house in Albany was well shielded from any passing eyes, and while we weren't there often enough to have fresh food, there was a large amount of canned goods. If you need to throw a party, let me know, and I can have groceries delivered.
I may, and the rulers of China might be in for a very big surprise.
He all but snarled the words. Carelian? I asked, suddenly worried.
Later. Don't kill anyone. I want to watch when you do.
I huffed out an exasperated sigh and returned my focus to the room and screen, only to find everyone staring at me. What? I asked, looking around.
Where did your cat take the Dragon of China?
Scott demanded. For all his flatness earlier, I wondered if he was about to have a stroke. Carelian did not take Tianting anywhere. Oddly, some words were easier to say when Carelian said them in my mind, and I didn't even stumble over the pronunciation. Everyone looked at me blankly. The Emperor surged to the front of his flunkies and glared through the screen at me.
Where is my familiar?
Apparently having lunch with mine. Talk to him. He'll respond if he feels like it. I crossed my arms and glared back. Or haven't you learned that a familiar is not a pet or a possession? They are a person just like you and me, and have the ability to do what they want. I could feel the eyes of everyone on me, and I didn't care. I was sick and tired of people being treated as less because they were different. And while Carelian might like to play the animal occasionally, I would not let people who knew better disrespect him like that. The Emperor, I really needed to know his name, grimaced and gave a sharp jerk of his head.
Very well. Though I begin to see why Tomahito declared you anathema. Doing the same is tempting.
I bristled, about to chew him out. Then he flinched the tiniest bit and held up his hand.
Peace. It was a poor joke, and I will not be doing anything of that kind.
He may have been more believable if he wasn't grinding out the words, and looking like he'd rather be chopping heads off with a sword than talk to us. One of the guards yammered at him, and he snarled. It was both amusing and intimidating at the same time. It was also by far the most honest expression I'd seen on anyone since the whole thing started. He snapped out a few The guard fell silent.
Carry on,
he growled, and turned and stalked out, the guards scrambling behind him. They looked freaked out, twisting and checking every space as they moved. I think they just realized they are beings for which distance and location is not an issue. The words came out louder than I intended, and everyone looked at me, a bit wild-eyed. I forced a smile to my face. Welcome to my life. Shall we get back to discussing the terms to present to Japan? They stared at me, then nodded, and slowly people sat back down. I sat at my computer, pretending to be unaffected, but for the next 2 hours, Scott kept giving me worried glances. When we finished at 10 p.m., I was exhausted. I wanted a piece of fruit and bed.
We need to talk in the morning,
Scott said, but he was much politer than prior. Sounds great. See you then. I kept my voice chirpy as I packed up everything. He just nodded and raced away. I'd finished out the week at the hotel, then commute from Atlanta. I waited until everyone was gone. Then I sidestepped to the hotel. Carelian was waiting for me. I glanced around the room. The dragon would have been extremely noticeable in here, if not too big for it. Tian go home?
No, he would like to talk to you.
I gave Carelian a long look. Not tonight. It is well after 10. I have to be back at work tomorrow by 7, and there will be a meeting involving me. Who knows what will happen? I might be happy to still have a job. I started stripping off my clothes. Work clothes were much less comfortable than a t-shirt.
It is important, more important than sleep.
That made me pause, and I gave him a hard look. He didn't blink or back down, just sat there, waiting for my decision. Did you at least put a cider in the fridge for me? I didn't think I could handle more earth-shaking news today. I was very glad I'd eaten, but I still was a bit hungry. There were nuts and snack bars there.
Yes, I figured you might like something. Plan on extra coffee in the morning.
With that parting comment, he slipped into a rip and away. I groaned and pulled on a comfortable shirt and jeans, then my sandals. Dressed in clothes I liked, I stepped to the designated spot in the house. We had set aside an area, taped off even. It was always kept clear of everything. It meant I didn't need to think, I just stepped. Stress I hadn't realized I was carrying dropped off me. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a cider. The fridge was mostly empty outside of that. I took a moment to pop the lid off and took a drink before heading out the back. Exhaustion settled on me like a weight, but it was still easier to deal with than the stress I had been carrying. I was glad I'd swallowed before I stepped out back, as it looked like they were having a mythical creatures meeting. Tian took up a chunk of the yard, with Esmir in kitty loaf position, Banurl sprawled out across from her, and Carelian across from the dragon. They all looked up at me as I walked out. I smiled, walking toward them. Hey, Tian, it's good to meet you. Up close, the dragon's eyes were swirls of gold with vertical pupils. While they were the same color I'd seen cats with, they seemed richer, more exotic. He blinked at me.
Merlin,
he said in my head. His mental voice had the roar of thunder as an undertone that made you expect lightning at any moment. Please, just Corey. The Merlin crap is stupid. Besides, any of you could eat me before I could react.
Humans are better marinated in fear. You would be too bland as you don't fear.
Esmir licked her shoulder as she responded. I believe I don't want to know how you know that. I dropped next to Carelian, one hand petting down his back, the other holding my cider, legs out in front of me. So what's up? Carelian said you needed to talk to me. The dragon looked at me, his scales blood red in the light from the back porch.
You meant it when you said she would just talk to me. Your human is very odd.
My queens are unique and powerful. Corey is the best. She sees only the being, not the form. Tell her she will have ideas.
Carelian purred as he talked, and I rolled my eyes. He's biased. I'm not that great. I still don't use my magic as well as I should, and Merlin knows I'm making a mess of this job. I took a sip of cider, trying to let my frustration go. I knew it wasn't all my fault, but surely I could make it better. Though I'd prefer to help without giving up my inheritance. I didn't even know what it was yet. Tian curled up tighter, his white frills almost luminescent in the dark.
I was very young when magic returned. A rip opened underneath me as I cracked my egg, and I fell at the feet of the man who would become emperor. I have never seen another dragon, and what few familiars that came to court were never allowed in my presence. They told me they didn't want to risk me eating them. I lived my days in the palace, but only spoke to Jixing, he of the most recent child of heaven, no one else. I was regarded with awe and fear until Carelian spoke to me. I existed in loneliness. Each Merlin in the royal family called to me, and when my current mage died, I moved my link to the one closest. not knowing any other option. It never even occurred to me to talk to anyone beside my focus. But they rarely had time for me, so I have spent my time listening, learning, and not understanding just how huge this world was.
He sounded like rain in a storm, sad and powerful. Wait, you've basically been in isolation with nothing but humans for over 150 years? I asked. When the great figure nodded his head, I wanted to run over and hug him. Okay, that bites. I'm sure Joe and Sable would love to meet you. And if I'm not at work, you can come talk to me.
Oh, we have addressed that. I'm working on finding his family. Dragons are relatively rare, and most dragons are really only located in one area of the realms. We should find them in a few days, if not sooner.
Esmir sounded sure of herself. I'm very glad that Carelian tried to give me a heart attack and did that, but I'm not sure that necessitated me staying up and coming here. I prodded gently, while fighting a yawn. I could sense the thoughts rippling between them as Bainurl focused on his wings. It amused me how many of the realm beings used grooming the same way humans use playing games on their phones. Carelian spoke, though he sounded reluctant.
Tieting has been listening and learning for a long time, and to both his benefit and detriment, many in the palace think of him as nothing but a pretty animal. Even his current focus rarely speaks to him for advice or even friendship. But he has been listening for years, and after we talked, much of what he had overheard fit into a puzzle he was unaware of.
I knew how fast they could communicate huge amounts of information when they didn't need to slow it down for humans and words. Okay, and? All I wanted to do was go to sleep. The side air hadn't helped, and the desire to go upstairs to my bedroom and crash was getting stronger. This time, Tieting spoke in my head.
And I believe Tishing's sister is behind a plan to kill mages in your country.
Chapter 26 Section 2.20.22 Familiars are both pets and children. While their mage can be held responsible for their actions, it is understood that a familiar will not be expected to obey cultural or societal expectations, nor will the mage be punished because of these. The sleepiness vanished, and I jerked upright and stared at the dragon. Did you really just tell me China's behind the mages that are dying? His long whiskers quivered.
I am unsure how far the plan goes, though I do not believe Qisheng is aware of it as anything other than a dismissed idea. His sister Huleng is the Minister of Magic. He trusts her implicitly.
I sat there trying to figure out what to do. Ask anything. Why did I get bombshells like this dropped on my lap? You don't trust her? There was a long pause. Then finally, Tieting said,
I believe she desires to see China supreme, no matter the cost.
And you? Tieting rippled through his long, sinewy body.
I am not in favor of killing mages, or killing in general. Any policy set on controlling by killing those you cannot control carries with it the seeds of destruction.
I sighed and set down my bottle. I need more information, and I'm very sure you don't really want America as a whole to react to this. It would mean war. That much I was sure of. A foreign country actively killing mages that the government leaned on to create the basis of their scientific and military power? Trade would shudder to a standstill. I stopped, tilting my head as other things occurred to me. Or did we already know? Tieting, did you ever overhear them talking about or with Americans? I don't believe this could be easily done without inside cooperation. The dragon curled tighter, and I waited, worried even more. I really wanted to talk to Charles and take a look at his data. At this point, I need to start paying him.
I am unsure. While I have learned most language spoken in the court, telling the nationality of a human is confusing. There are very few people that are not Chinese that are trusted by the royal family. They are like a wounded deer, startling at everything. And Huling does not like me. She has lust in her heart at my existence and hates that I went with her brother.
I groaned and dropped my head into my hands. There wasn't going to be enough coffee in the world for me to be able to handle tomorrow morning. After rubbing my temples, I raised my head. Tietang, I'm very honored that you chose to share this information with me. But I have to ask, why? What do you want me to do, and where do your loyalties lie? It was a question I never asked Carelian. I didn't want to know. Part of me expected him to choose his mother, or his people over me any day of the week. Humans were horrible. But then I didn't know all the machinations that went on over in the realms. Every being there focused on grooming. Carelian extended his back leg, chewing on a spot, while Esmir cleaned her claws, Bainjarl focused on his wings, and the Merlin blasted dragon licked tail. That is not helpful, nor reassuring. I stared at all of them, waiting for the answer. Esmir glanced at the dragon, then at her son, and hissed. It was an annoyed sound that I completely agreed with and would have duplicated if I could have made that noise.
You are all cowards. Corey, we don't think or follow the way you do. And those who were selected to be focuses are even more strange. Tursane, Salastra, Bob, and the others are not gods we worship. They are heroes that ascended to power most of us do not even dream of.
Nor do we want.
Bainjarl snorted, then fell silent at a glare from Esmir.
If you want to explain this, please do.
She managed to hiss in my mind, and he buried his head in his wing to avoid her gaze. Tietang was listening as avidly as I was. His upbringing must have been non-existent if all of this was new to him.
You have an organized society, rules, and groups. We have a few rituals, some understood truths, but everything else is open. You saw the dedication to magic. She, he, it is the only power we worship, but strength rules everywhere else. Those who are focuses, both per their inclination and magic's choice, are strong, stronger than most.
I glanced at Carelian, who didn't look at me, working hard on his hind haunch that was already perfect.
We don't do loyalties to countries, gods, realms, or even branches of magic the way you do. We choose who our friends are, and they tend to be the only things we are loyal to. Our version of our families. Friends are more than lovers, as very few of us have mates the way humans do. We have clans of those who think and believe in line with us. My son pulled you into our little clan.
She huffed a bit and looked at Tietang.
You are not obligated to be loyal to anyone or anything. That is your choice.
Even my mage?
His mental voice was somehow tremulous, uncertain, not the strong, impressive thing I thought I'd hear from a dragon.
Even your mage. There have been many that have lost their mages over the years for various reasons. This is always your choice.
Tietang curled up tight, appearing half the size I knew he was.
I must think if that is allowable.
Esmir shrugged.
Think, ponder, take a century or two if you need it. But do remember, humans are normally fragile, and you can often ignore them until they decay onto death.
I made a face at her, and she ignored me.
Your kindness has been extreme.
He wriggled up, holding his upper body in the air like a cobra, and I waited to see what he was going to say. But a pain stabbed my eye hard and deep, and I knew whomever was coming through was opening a much bigger rip than usual.
Ah, Tursane is here, and I believe she has brought a guest.
There was a bit of disapproval in Esmir's voice.
Corey, we have abused your hospitality sorely.
I turned to look at the rip that was forming near the orchard. It was almost as tall as the nearest tree, which was 18 feet tall. Tursane slithered out, but she appeared in her normal guise, only about 6 feet tall. Before I could spend much more time worrying about that, something huge moved into the opening of the tear. It bent around the edges, and a dragon stuck its head out. I swallowed the yelp of terror that burst out from my lungs, and I fell back into Carelian. The only reason I didn't start reaching for magic and figuring out how to kill a dragon, something that never had occurred to me before the second, was his purring.
Ah, Corey.
Tursane nodded at me.
I forgot you were here. Smog, this is Corey Monroe.
The dragon was huge. Like, half as big as my house huge. The quarter-acre yard in the back suddenly felt like a tiny sandbox with an adult in it. While Tiatang looked like the typical Chinese dragon that had been in that culture centuries before the magic spread, Smog looked like the dragon you saw when you looked for European dragons. 2 wings, 4 legs, green, scaly skin, and teeth as long as my forearm. It glanced at me, a quick, dismissive glance, then nodded before focusing on Tiatang. A hissing, slippery sound came out of the dragon's long muzzle, and Tiatang froze. A feeling of waiting, like a storm about to break, filled the air. Then Tiatang said something. The liquid sound halted and jerked slowly as they fell out of his mouth. It sounded the way I did when I tried to speak Spanish, slow and hesitating, as I translated in my mind from English to Spanish. Even with scales, horns, and wings, I could see the joy in her face. You have returned my child to me. I assumed he had been eaten. He was barely hatched when he disappeared. I never thought the magic would have chosen him. And your world is so big, looking for him would be impossible. She turned her huge head back to him. It is time to go home. Tiatang turned to look at Carelian.
You have reached out to me. Let me know I am not alone.
He turned to follow Smog through the rip and paused.
Please, tell Jijing I have thinking to do.
I choked and tried to breathe. Before I could protest, scream, or get any words past my sphincter-tight throat, they stepped through the rip, and it rippled into something much smaller. My mouth opened and closed as I tried to protest. What just happened? I croaked out. Tursane slid over to me and crouched down.
Is there an issue? And I did need to express my pleasure again at the little treat you provided me.
I wanted to follow up on the idea that they expected me to tell the ruler of another country that his familiar was doing a walkabout with his family, but I forced myself to look at her and made the sides of my mouth quiver. That was all I could pull off as I really wanted to run screaming after them, yelling, "Don't go!" Instead, I pretended I was an adult and focused on the scary demigod, which in retrospect, maybe I could piss her off and get her to kill me. That might be the safer way to go. What does death by a Gorgon feel like? She arched an eyebrow at me, and I realized I had said that out loud.
I am not sure. My racial magic causes all the cells in your body to fossilize. I imagine it would be relatively painless, though the few humans I have killed that way screamed the entire time, so I could be wrong.
Technically, I could make the earth open up and swallow me, but I couldn't see any way to do it and not damage the house or grounds. I'm glad you enjoyed the magic absorption. I think. I never asked. Did anyone die because of that? Li Fan had implied mostly it had been good, but I didn't figure then had been a good time to press for details.
Not from me draining their magic. The exactitude of your laws allowed magic to guide me and make sure I took it only from those not capable of following your rules, not those who did not wish to follow the rules.
I heaved a sigh of relief. I'm glad.
Your discovery of the lost one has earned you many favors. So,
do not be surprised by the occasional visitor. Smog is a spirit lord, and our clan have long memories.
Putting my head in my hands and bawling about the things everyone expected of me, things I had no idea how to fix, wouldn't change anything. Instead, I stood up and nodded at Tersain. You really need to thank Carelian. He started all of this. I'm just the schmuck trying to clean up the messes.
Ah, but you are he. All four of you actually are regarded as the same. You share the rewards and the blame.
I blinked at her, completely surprised.
So you did good. I must go. Bane Jarl.
They nodded at each other as Tersain turned to leave.
You still coming over in the evening tomorrow, Esmir? Salastra still not speaking to me.
She is still in a snit. That filly needs a good stallion. Esmir rose. Yes, I will see you then.
Then good night, all.
She turned and slithered out the rip, Esmir and Bane Jarl following with waves of goodbye. I turned to Carelian and stared at him.
Yes?
He yawned wide as he responded, then blinked at me, slow and languid. Just how am I supposed to explain that the Emperor of China's familiar went to visit family?
By saying just that? What are they going to do? Your people almost never execute anyone, and you have done nothing to deserve that. Besides, I would never allow my queen to be executed. I think I will sleep at home tonight.
Before I could sputter out a response, he leapt and was gone. I stood in the backyard of a house I rarely got to live in and contemplated going stark raving mad. Somehow, I didn't think it would be that long of a journey.